Imagine waking up one morning and realizing there's no solid proof anyone else exists. You see people, you hear them, you talk to them, but how do you know they're real? That's the question at the heart of Solipsism. It's the idea that only your own mind is certain to exist. Everyone else, your friends, family, even strangers, might be figments of your imagination. You can't prove they aren't. That thought alone can make your stomach drop. Solipsism doesn't say that other people aren't real. It just says you can't know for sure. I'd love to invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's incredible to think about how we're all connected through these stories and ideas. If you enjoy these thought-provoking explorations, consider subscribing to Tired Thinker so we can keep bringing you reflective narratives. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let your imagination drift as we delve into the mind-boggling paradoxes and mysteries. You might assume your friend sitting across the table has thoughts, feelings, memories, and a sense of self, but all you actually experience are their words, facial expressions, and actions. You never directly access their mind. You don't feel their emotions. You don't hear their inner monologue. You only see what they show you, and even that only through your own perspective. Think about a dream. While you're in it, everything feels real. You might talk to people, walk down streets, eat food, or have arguments. It all feels normal until you wake up. Then it hits you. None of those people existed. They were just your brain doing its thing. They had faces, they had voices, they even seemed to have personalities, but they were never separate from you. They were mental shadows. Now ask yourself, how do you know this right now isn't the same kind of thing? You might say, because I'm awake. But how do you define being awake? By how it feels, by how consistent the world seems. What if your dreams just don't usually last this long? Or what if this version of reality is just another kind of dream? The unsettling part about solipsism is that it doesn't go away if you ignore it. It just waits in the back of your mind. Every time you interact with someone, it reminds you, you only experience them through your senses. That means your access to them is always indirect. And if it's indirect, it might not be reliable. You might argue that the consistency of the world proves it's real. Gravity always works. People act in ways you expect. The sun comes up every day. But that's exactly what happens in dreams too. In dreams, your mind often fills in the blanks to make things seem logical. You don't notice the weird parts until later. During the dream, everything usually feels fine. That's what makes solipsism so hard to shake. It mirrors how dreams operate. Try this. Walk into a room and really look at it. Look at the chairs, the light switch, the pattern on the floor. Ask yourself, did this room exist before I walked in? Or did it just pop into being because I expected it to be here? In video games, entire worlds load only when the player gets close. The rest doesn't exist until it needs to. What if reality works the same way? What if your mind builds each moment based on memory, habit, and expectation? You might find comfort in asking someone else what they think about solipsism. But if solipsism is true, that person isn't real. They're part of the simulation. Whatever answer they give you comes from your own mind. It's like trying to get a puppet to surprise you. It might feel like it's thinking, but you're the one pulling the strings. Solipsism also plays tricks on memory. You assume your past happened. You remember school, trips, childhood birthdays. But memory is slippery. You've had dreams that felt like they stretched across years. You've had false memories, times when you were sure something happened, only to learn it didn't. If your mind can invent the past in dreams, what stops it from doing the same thing now? How can you be sure your memories are real? What if your entire life story came into being 5 minutes ago, along with all the evidence to support it? People often respond to solipsism with a shrug. Well, it doesn't feel like I'm the only mind, so I'll keep acting like others are real. That's practical. It's also evasive. Solipsism doesn't care how you feel. It only points out what you can't prove. You can't reach outside your own experience. Everything comes through your senses, and your senses can be fooled. Think about illusions. When you see a mirage in the desert, it looks like water. Your brain interprets heat waves as reflections. You might even believe it's real until you get closer. The same goes for hallucinations. People with certain conditions see things that aren't there. Their minds fill in details that don't exist. If your senses can create things that aren't real, then your entire experience could be suspect. Even pain isn't exempt. When you stub your toe, the pain feels very real, but it's still just your brain interpreting signals. If your brain can produce the sensation of pain without an actual injury, as happens with phantom limb syndrome, then your sense of the body is also not trustworthy. The mind is the final filter for all experience. Solipsism just points that out and asks, what exists beyond the filter? Here's another scenario. Imagine you're the only real person, and everyone else is part of a test. Maybe some higher power created this world just for you. Everyone else is an actor, programmed to respond in ways that test your morals or reactions. Every compliment, every fight, every friendship, it's all part of the simulation. That might sound paranoid, but again, you can't disprove it. You assume other people have inner lives, but you don't see their thoughts. You only see what they do. You trust their actions mean something deeper. But that trust is based on faith, not proof. Solipsism isn't a belief system you adopt because it makes life easier. It does the opposite. It removes the ground from under your feet. It asks you to live with uncertainty, not just the usual kind, uncertainty about the future or what people think, but a deeper kind, uncertainty about the very existence of others, about the reality of the world, about the idea of a shared experience. Some philosophers use solipsism as a tool, not because they think it's true, but because it sharpens their thinking. It makes them ask, what do I really know? What assumptions am I making? What evidence do I have? That kind of skepticism can be useful, but it also opens a door that's hard to close. Once you admit you can't prove anyone else exists, every interaction takes on a strange quality. You laugh with someone, but a part of your brain wonders if you're laughing alone. You say, I love you, and a quiet voice asks, who are you saying it to? If this person is just a projection, then the love is still real, but only within you. You're playing every role, writing the script, performing it, reacting to it. The whole theater is yours. You might say, this is ridiculous, I don't feel alone. But feeling isn't the same as knowing. People with dreams, hallucinations, and delusions also feel like their experiences are real. That's the trap solipsism points to. Just because something feels true doesn't mean it is. Just because the world feels solid doesn't mean it exists outside your mind. Solipsism doesn't offer comfort. It doesn't solve anything. It just raises a mirror and says, this is all you get. Your mind, your perceptions. Everything else is a maybe. Whether you stare into that mirror or look away is up to you. But it's always there, waiting. Moral anti-realism says that there are no objective moral truths. That means good and bad, right and wrong, are not facts of the world in the way gravity or water are. They are ideas we created. They may feel real, they may seem obvious, but they don't exist outside of our minds or societies. People believe in morality, but under moral anti-realism, morality has no grounding outside human thought. To understand this, imagine you're watching a crime show. The detective finds someone who killed another person. Everyone agrees that murder is wrong. The judge, the jury, the public all say the act is evil. But why is it wrong? Is it because there's a rule written in the universe that says killing is bad? Or is it wrong because humans say it is? Moral anti-realism says it's the second one. People made the rule. It's not baked into reality. Most of us grow up with the idea that some things are just right and others are just wrong. We're told stealing is bad, lying is bad, helping others is good. These ideas get passed down in schools, religions, and laws. Over time, they feel like natural truths, but moral anti-realism pushes back. It says those rules are inventions, not discoveries. You can think of it like traffic laws. Driving on the right side of the road isn't right in some deep cosmic way. It's right because the people in your country agreed to it. In another country, driving on the left side is just as right. There's no universal rule that one side is better. Moral anti-realism argues that moral rules work the same way. Take another example. In some cultures, it's okay to eat certain animals. In others, it's not. Hindus may see eating beef as wrong. In parts of the US, people eat hamburgers without thinking twice. Who's right? A moral realist might say one side is closer to the truth. A moral anti-realist says both are just acting based on local rules and habits. There is no ultimate truth about eating beef. There are just different human opinions. This idea becomes even clearer when we look at history. A few hundred years ago, slavery was common in many parts of the world. People accepted it, some even defended it as moral. Today, many see it as one of the worst things humans have ever done. So which is it? Was slavery once moral, but now isn't? Did morality change, or did people just change their views? Moral anti-realism says morality didn't change, people did. The rules people used to judge actions shifted. The actions themselves didn't come with built-in moral labels. People often respond to moral anti-realism with discomfort. They say, "So you're telling me murder isn't really wrong?" That reaction makes sense. It feels dangerous to say moral rules are made up. If everyone believed that, would chaos follow? Would people start hurting each other? But moral anti-realism doesn't say we should get rid of morals. It says we need to understand where they come from. You can still have rules and values. You can still say murder is wrong, but you're saying it as a person or a group, not as a voice for the universe. Imagine two friends arguing. One says, lying is always wrong. The other says, sometimes it's okay if it helps someone. They're not arguing about facts like the boiling point of water. They're arguing about values. If moral realism is true, then one of them is wrong in a deep sense, like someone saying the earth is flat. But if moral anti-realism is true, then neither is wrong in that way. They just prefer different moral systems, like one person preferring jazz and another liking rock music. This doesn't mean anything goes. Societies still create rules to live by. They punish people who break them. But those rules are built on human needs, not universal laws. A community might decide that stealing hurts trust, so it bans it. That doesn't make stealing objectively wrong. It makes it something that group chooses to stop for practical reasons. Even science can't settle moral debates. Science can show what happens when people steal. It can measure pain and happiness. But it can't say whether pain is bad or happiness is good in an ultimate sense. Those judgments come from people. You can't put wrongness in a test tube. Some philosophers take this further. They say when people say, that's wrong, they're not stating facts, they're expressing feelings or commands. This view is called emotivism, a branch of moral anti-realism. Saying stealing is wrong becomes more like saying, boo, stealing, or don't steal. It's not a true or false claim, it's an expression. Others take a slightly different approach called constructivism. They say morality isn't discovered or just felt, it's built. People use reason, discussion, and social tools to make moral systems. Still, those systems are human-made. They have no authority outside the people who build and follow them. Critics of moral anti-realism say it opens the door to terrible things. If morality isn't real, then how can we say genocide is bad or child abuse? The fear is that without moral truths, we lose the power to condemn evil. But supporters of anti-realism respond that we don't need magic truths to act. We can say something is cruel, harmful, or damaging. We can protect others because we care about them, not because of cosmic rules. You can imagine a society where people agree that causing pain is something they want to avoid. They build laws and customs to reduce it. They teach children empathy. They punish those who hurt others. All of that can happen without saying pain is objectively wrong. It just needs people to agree, and most do. We don't like suffering. We want peace. That's enough to start building. It's worth noticing how often people disagree about morals. Abortion, death penalty, euthanasia, war, eating meat. These debates go on and on. If there were objective truths, wouldn't we have found them by now? Wouldn't people agree like they agree on basic science? Maybe the reason we don't agree is because we're not talking about facts. We're talking about values. And values come from people, not from the structure of the universe. So what happens if you accept moral anti-realism? You might become more humble in moral debates. You might stop saying, I'm right and you're wrong, and start saying, here's what I believe and why. You might ask others to explain their views. You might think more about the reasons behind your own beliefs. You don't have to give up caring. You just stop pretending your values are written in stone. The idea can feel cold at first. It seems to strip the world of meaning. But it also gives freedom. It means we are responsible for the moral world we live in. We aren't following orders from the sky. We are choosing, together, what kind of lives we want to build. Moral anti-realism doesn't mean giving up on morality. It means understanding morality as a human project, not a cosmic fact. That shift changes how we see ourselves and others. It makes room for disagreement. It makes us the authors of our own codes. And for some, that's not disturbing, it's empowering. Determinism is the idea that every action, choice, or event happens because of something that came before it. That means if we knew all the facts about the past and all the laws of nature, we could predict everything that would ever happen. Every word you say, every move you make, even the thoughts that run through your mind, would follow a chain of causes going back to the beginning of time. If that's true, it raises a hard question. Do you really have free will? Think about waking up in the morning. You hit the snooze button, roll over, and decide to stay in bed for 10 more minutes. It feels like a choice. It feels like you could have gotten up right away. But determinism says your brain, your habits, your level of tiredness, your stress from yesterday, and even your DNA all came together to make that choice happen. You didn't make the decision freely. The decision came out of everything that shaped you. This view goes back a long way. Some early scientists believed in what's called Laplace's demon. Imagine a super intelligent being who knows everything about the current state of the world, where every atom is, how fast it's moving, and what forces act on it. With that knowledge, it could calculate everything that will ever happen. According to this idea, the universe works like a giant clock. Once it's wound up, it just keeps ticking according to fixed rules. There's no room for anything random or spontaneous. Everything is part of the chain. This sounds cold, but it makes sense if you accept that physical laws govern the world. A ball thrown in the air follows a predictable path. A rock dropped into a pond makes ripples you can model with math. Human brains are made of matter too. Neurons fire because of electrical and chemical signals. If those signals follow rules, then maybe our thoughts and feelings do too. You might think emotions or creativity escape this pattern. Maybe writing a poem or feeling love is free from cause and effect. But think about it more closely. A poem reflects the writer's past. It shows how they've lived, what they've read, how they think, and even their mood that day. Love might feel sudden and deep, but it's shaped by biology, upbringing, past relationships, and personality. These don't spring out of nowhere. They form slowly, shaped by time and environment. If you remove every influence that led someone to fall in love with another person, the feeling would likely not exist. Let's take a practical case. Suppose someone grows up in a violent neighborhood with little access to education. They commit a crime later in life. Did they choose it freely? The legal system often assumes they did, but determinism suggests otherwise. That person's brain developed under stress, trauma, and survival instincts. If we could trace every cause, maybe we'd see their actions as predictable, even inevitable. That doesn't mean we excuse crime, but it changes how we think about blame. Even in day-to-day life, determinism pokes holes in how we see ourselves. You might believe you're in control. You choose your job, your partner, your lunch. But all of those choices arise from what came before. You picked a sandwich because you like it. Why do you like it? Maybe your parents made it when you were a kid. Maybe your culture values that kind of food. You didn't choose those things. They happened to you. Now, someone might say, okay, but I feel like I'm making a choice. That's true. The feeling is real. But the feeling itself might be caused by brain processes we don't see. Imagine a computer that runs a program. The program acts based on input. It reacts, but it doesn't know it's being controlled by code. We might be like that. Consciousness might just be the tip of the iceberg. Underneath, complex systems make decisions before we even become aware of them. Experiments support this idea. In some neuroscience studies, people press a button while hooked up to brain scanners. The scanner picks up signals showing which button they'll press before they know it themselves. That doesn't mean we don't experience choice, but it suggests the choice happens earlier, before we're aware. The brain might decide, and then the mind catches up. Still, many people resist this view. We like to believe we have free will. It gives us a sense of dignity and control. It helps us assign responsibility. But determinism forces us to reconsider that. If all your choices are the result of things you didn't choose, your genes, your past, your surroundings, can you really be praised or blamed? Some philosophers say yes. They argue that as long as your actions come from your own character and desires, you're still responsible. Others say that's just moving the goalposts. If your character and desires were shaped by forces you didn't pick, then what's left? There's also the question of regret. If determinism is true, then you couldn't have done anything differently. That time you said the wrong thing, or hurt someone you care about, or didn't chase a dream, you might feel guilt. But if every one of those actions was bound to happen, how can you blame yourself? And if you can't blame yourself, can you forgive yourself? Some people find that idea comforting. Others find it terrifying. Let's look at relationships. Imagine a couple arguing. One person says, "You always choose to ignore my needs." The other says, "I don't choose to ignore you. I just don't notice when you're upset." Determinism suggests both are right in their own way. The first person feels neglected. The second person didn't make a conscious decision. They acted based on their habits, personality, and upbringing. Maybe they grew up in a home where emotions were hidden. That shaped their behavior. Neither of them chose their patterns. But the conflict still hurts. Understanding the causes might help them break the pattern, but it doesn't erase the damage. Even ambition looks different through this lens. You might push hard to succeed. You wake up early, work late, study, network, sacrifice. But what made you that way? Maybe your parents drilled work ethic into you. Maybe you fear failure because of past rejection. You might admire your drive, but determinism says it's not something you chose from nothing. You were built for it. Someone else might lack that drive because they were shaped differently. Are they lazy or just different products of different causes? There's also a strange implication. If we fully understood the causes of human behavior, we could predict everything. That includes voting patterns, economic choices, even revolutions. In theory, a government or corporation could manipulate outcomes by adjusting conditions. That's already happening in a way, through algorithms and targeted ads. If your attention and behavior can be steered by something outside of you, where does that leave your freedom? Even love gets complicated. If your partner treats you well, makes you feel seen, and shares your values, you may think you chose them. But maybe your brain recognized familiar traits from childhood. Maybe you bonded over shared trauma. Maybe timing mattered more than anything else. Love might be real, but its shape and direction could be more fixed than we like to admit. The biggest fear behind determinism is that it makes us machines. But that may not be the best metaphor. We're not clocks or computers. We're messy, emotional, complex systems shaped by biology, memory, and environment. Still, if we are systems, then our paths aren't random. They unfold from what came before. That's the heart of determinism. Not fate, not destiny, but cause and effect, over and over, without pause. Nihilism is the idea that life has no objective meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. It claims that, at its core, existence is empty of higher significance. This doesn't mean people can't feel meaning or value in life, but it does mean that, according to nihilism, any meaning we find is something we create for ourselves. It's not built into the universe. It's not handed down from a god or written into the laws of nature. It's just something we come up with because we need to. This can sound bleak, but it's not about emotion. Nihilism isn't saying that life feels meaningless. It says life is meaningless, at least when it comes to meaning that exists outside of us. A rock doesn't care if you live or die. The sun will shine whether or not you become a good person. The universe doesn't recognize your choices. From the standpoint of the cosmos, your victories and your failures weigh the same. Not at all. People often resist this idea. Many find it threatening, but it helps to look at why someone would think this way in the first place. Start with religion. For thousands of years, people turned to religion to find answers. Why are we here? What happens after we die? What does it mean to be good? Religion gave answers to these questions. Often it said we were here because a God created us, that God gave our lives purpose. It promised justice, reward, or punishment after death. These stories made suffering easier to bear. They gave people a sense that life was part of a bigger plan. But as time went on, more people started questioning those stories. Science grew, philosophy evolved. People began asking, what if there is no God? What if there is no plan? What if we are just a species that evolved on a small planet circling an average star in one galaxy among billions? In that case, There's no script. There's no greater reason for us to be here. There's no afterlife waiting to balance the scales. We are born, we live, we die, and then we're gone. That's where nihilism begins. It's the recognition that if there's no God, no cosmic purpose, and no final justice, then maybe there's no ultimate meaning at all. Think of a person standing in a vast desert at night, looking up at the stars. It's beautiful, but it's also silent. There's no voice calling out to tell them why they exist. There's just the cold emptiness of space. That's the image many people associate with nihilism. This view raises a lot of questions. If nothing has meaning, why do anything at all? Why get up in the morning? Why try to be kind or brave or wise? Why not just stop caring completely? That's where some people get nihilism wrong. Just because nothing has objective meaning doesn't mean subjective meaning can't exist. A person might know, deep down, that the universe doesn't assign value to love or art or truth. But that same person might still choose to care about those things. They might find joy in them. They might decide to protect them. The difference is that they're not pretending those things have value outside of human life. They're accepting that the value comes from us. It's created, not discovered. Imagine a person spending their weekend building a model ship. They know the ship won't sail, it won't make money, it won't change the world. But they do it because they enjoy the process. They find beauty in the work. That's meaning, even if it's not cosmic meaning. Now imagine that same person takes care of a friend who's sick. They know it won't be remembered by history. It won't earn them reward points in the afterlife. But they do it because it feels right to them. Because they care. That's still meaning. So nihilism doesn't require you to give up on everything. It only asks you to stop lying to yourself about where meaning comes from. It says, don't look for value out there. It's not in the stars or in ancient texts. It's in the choices you make, the relationships you build, the things you care about. But there's another side to nihilism that's darker. Not everyone handles the idea well. Some fall into despair. If nothing matters, why not do harm? Why not cheat or steal or destroy? That's the road to what's called moral nihilism. It says not only is life without meaning, but also that nothing is truly right or wrong. There's no universal code. No one is watching. And no action is better than any other in some grand moral sense. This is where many people start to panic. They think, if moral nihilism is true, then society will fall apart. But that's not always the case. A person can recognize the absence of moral absolutes and still choose to follow certain rules. They might decide that kindness and fairness are better ways to live, not because they're written in the fabric of reality, but because they reduce suffering. They make life better for everyone involved. In other words, people don't have to believe in divine punishment to behave decently. They can base their values on shared experience and empathy. Let's take an example. Suppose someone sees a child drowning. There's no one else around. The person could walk away and suffer no consequences. A nihilist might say, if there's no God, no karma, and no objective morality, then there's no requirement to help. But that doesn't mean the person won't help. Maybe they feel pain seeing another suffer. Maybe they know they'd want someone to help if the roles were reversed. Maybe they act out of habit, or love, or a sense of who they want to be. These reasons don't rely on eternal truths. They come from inside. Still, nihilism remains hard for many people to sit with. It doesn't offer comfort. It doesn't give guarantees. It doesn't tell you everything will work out. It only says, this is what it looks like when you remove the scaffolding of illusion. You're standing on the ground now. There's no safety net. But you can still walk forward. Some thinkers embraced nihilism as a kind of freedom. If life has no built-in purpose, you're not tied to anyone else's script. You can write your own. But that takes effort. It takes courage. It takes being honest about what you value and why. And that honesty can be scary. It means admitting that no one is coming to save you, that you are the one who has to decide what your life will mean. A lot of people avoid this responsibility. They cling to systems that tell them what to believe. That's easier. But nihilism strips those systems away. It says, the world doesn't owe you meaning. It doesn't provide it. If you want it, you have to build it. So nihilism, while disturbing, doesn't demand hopelessness. It asks you to face reality without illusions. It asks you to stand in the silence and not flinch. And if you can do that, it gives you something rare, The chance to choose your life without pretending you didn't. Imagine you're playing a video game. You control a character who walks around a world filled with objects, people, and events. Everything you see is made of pixels and code. The trees, the sky, the sound of the wind, it's all data. Now imagine you are the character inside that game, not the player. You walk, think, and feel, but everything around you, and even your body, is built from code. That's the idea behind the simulation hypothesis. It says our world might not be the real, physical world we think it is. Instead, it could be a computer simulation, and we wouldn't know the difference. This idea isn't science fiction anymore. It's a real question that some serious scientists and philosophers are thinking about. The basic claim is simple. If technology keeps advancing, and if it's possible to create a simulation of a world like ours, then it's likely that someone somewhere has already done it. And if they've done it, and they've made lots of these simulations, then the odds that we are in the one real world and not one of the many fake ones are very low. That's how the argument goes. The most famous version of this idea comes from Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford. He laid it out in a paper in 2003. His logic starts with a few possible outcomes. Either human civilization ends before we can build this kind of simulation, or we just never choose to build it. Or we build lots of them. If we build lots of simulations, and each simulation has people in it who think and feel like we do, then it's much more likely we are in one of those than in the one base reality. That sounds strange, but it's a numbers game. Think of it like this. Imagine one real world. In that world, people invent a powerful computer. That computer runs a simulation of a world like ours. In that simulation, there are people who don't know they're inside a program. Now imagine they do this not once, but millions of times. Maybe each simulation runs at different speeds. Maybe time moves faster inside them. Maybe the people inside create their own simulations. Now, the number of real physical people is very small compared to the number of simulated ones. If you pick a person at random, odds are that person is simulated. You might ask, how could we be sure? That's the problem. We can't be sure either way. If the simulation is good enough, we would have no way to detect it. Everything we see, hear, and feel would be generated from code. Our memories, our physics, our biology, all part of the program. If the simulation never glitches, we might never see a clue. And even if we did see something strange, we might just think it was a weird part of nature. Some people point to quantum physics as a possible clue. In quantum mechanics, particles seem to behave differently when we observe them. That has puzzled scientists for years. Some think this behavior is baked into nature. Others wonder if it's like rendering in a video game. A game only shows the parts of the world that the player can see. The rest of the world isn't drawn until it's needed. That saves power. Maybe our world works the same way. Maybe it only renders details when we look at them to save processing power. That's one idea. It doesn't prove anything, but it gives people something to think about. Another strange point is the limits in physics. The universe has a maximum speed, light speed. It has a minimum size, the Planck length. You can't look smaller than that. These could be signs of the universe having limits, like pixels in a screen or bits in a file. Again, this doesn't prove we're in a simulation, but it raises questions. Why would a natural world have built-in limits? But let's say we are in a simulation. What does that mean? First, it means everything we think is real. Trees, planets, other people might just be data. That's a hard idea to sit with. It means we don't know where we are. It means we don't know who created the simulation or why. It could be aliens. It could be future humans. It could be an artificial intelligence. Their goals might be science, entertainment, or something we can't guess. Maybe they're watching us. Maybe they've forgotten we exist. It also makes us think differently about free will. If we're in a program, do we still choose our actions? Maybe the simulation has rules that allow for free will. Or maybe we're following a script. That's not just a deep question. It affects how we think about law, ethics, and the meaning of life. There's also the question of pain and suffering. If someone built this simulation, they allowed all the bad things in it. War, disease, death. Someone coded that in or allowed it to happen. Why would they do that? Are they studying us? Are we entertainment? Is this a mistake? We don't know, but it makes the problem of evil even harder to think about. In a real world, we can say nature is cruel by accident. In a simulation, someone designed it. Some thinkers worry this idea might make people feel hopeless. If life is fake, why care? But others say it shouldn't change much. We still feel pain. We still love people. We still try to be good. Even if we're code, we are conscious code. We still matter to each other, and we can still act with kindness and courage. There's also a weird twist to this idea. If we ever build a simulation ourselves, one with people who think and feel, we would prove it's possible. That would make the odds that we ourselves are in a simulation go way up. It's like looking into a mirror and seeing another mirror behind you. The reflections go on forever. We'd be the reflection of a reflection, and so on. That creates a strange kind of risk. What if the people running our simulation decide to turn it off? Would we even know? Would everything just stop, like pulling the plug on a computer? Of course, some scientists push back. They say we have no real reason to believe this. No evidence, no test we can run. Others say the math works, but it's just not helpful. Even if it's true, we still live our lives inside it. We still need to eat, work, and sleep. We still feel love and grief. Whether the world is code or atoms, we still have to live in it. That's a fair point, but it doesn't stop the question from haunting people. People have always wondered about the nature of reality. In ancient times, Plato wrote about a cave where people only saw shadows on a wall, thinking that was all there was. In some ways, the simulation idea is just a modern cave. We wonder if we're seeing the shadows, not the real world. Maybe reality is deeper than we can see. Maybe we're just part of someone else's dream or project or experiment. It's possible we'll never know the answer. Maybe we're not meant to know. Maybe the simulation hides itself on purpose. Or maybe it's open and we just haven't looked in the right way yet. Either way, the question stays with us. It nags at the edge of our thoughts. What if everything we know is not real? What if we're the characters in someone else's game? And if that's true, what do we do with that knowledge? Panpsychism is the idea that everything in the universe has some form of consciousness, not just humans, not just animals, not even just living things, everything. A rock, a glass of water, a phone, a cloud, the atoms in the air. Panpsychism says they all have some kind of inner experience, no matter how faint or basic. It doesn't mean they have thoughts or emotions like humans. It just means they may have some degree of awareness or subjectivity, something it's like to be them, however small or strange that may be. Most people reject this idea at first. It sounds odd. We don't see rocks thinking or water making decisions. We treat inanimate objects as dead matter. They move only when something else moves them. They don't show signs of perception or behavior. But Panpsychism doesn't claim they think or act like animals. It only claims that experience is built into the fabric of the universe. It's not something that appears suddenly when a brain gets complicated enough. It's there all along, even in the simplest pieces of matter. The appeal of Panpsychism comes from one big problem in science and philosophy. No one knows how or why consciousness exists. Brains are made of cells. Cells are made of molecules. Molecules are made of atoms. Atoms don't seem conscious. But when you put billions of them together in a certain way, you get a brain. And from that, somehow, you get awareness. You get pain, joy, fear, color, memory, the things you actually experience. No one knows how that happens. Neuroscience can map out brain activity. It can show how different regions light up during different thoughts. But it can't explain how those electrical signals produce the feeling of red or the ache of heartbreak. This is called the hard problem of consciousness. It's hard because it's not about what the brain does. It's about what it feels like from the inside. A machine can detect heat and make a sound. A person feels burning. That inner part, what it's like to be you, doesn't show up in the brain scans. It doesn't show up in behavior. It can't be measured and it can't be proved to others. But it's the most certain thing in the world to you. You know you're conscious. You don't know that about anything else. Some people think consciousness just appears when matter gets complex enough. They say it's an emergent property, like wetness from water or solidity from atoms. Others say it's an illusion. The brain only thinks it's aware, but it isn't really. Panpsychism takes another route. It says the reason we can't explain consciousness is because we're looking in the wrong place. Maybe consciousness doesn't come from complex systems. Maybe it's already there in the smallest parts. If atoms have some tiny spark of experience, and those sparks combine in brains, that might explain why we have rich inner lives. To get a sense of this, imagine a single electron. According to Panpsychism, it doesn't think. It doesn't know it's an electron, but it has a tiny, dim sort of experience. Maybe it's more like a flicker than a feeling, a sort of proto-awareness. Not pain, not joy, but something basic. Now imagine billions of electrons forming atoms, and billions of atoms forming neurons. If each one carries a sliver of experience, and if those slivers somehow combine, then the brain might not create consciousness out of nothing. It might shape what was already there. This idea isn't new. It goes back to ancient Greece. Some early thinkers believed everything was alive in some way. In the 17th century, philosopher Baruch Spinoza said that mind and matter were two sides of the same thing. More recently, thinkers like Alfred North Whitehead and Galen Strawson have argued for versions of panpsychism. They see it not as a wild guess, but as a serious solution to a deep problem. Still, the idea has problems of its own. One big challenge is how the tiny experiences add up. If one electron has a flicker of awareness and another has its own flicker, how do those combine into a single stream of thought? This is called the combination problem. No one knows how small parts of consciousness could merge into a full mind. When you hear music, you don't hear billions of little blips. You hear one song. Your mind feels like one whole thing, not a crowd of voices. Another problem is testability. You can't look at an electron and see if it's conscious. You can't ask a rock how it feels. That makes panpsychism hard to prove or disprove. Critics say it's unfalsifiable. If it can't be tested, maybe it doesn't belong in science at all. But some argue that we already accept other things we can't directly observe. We believe in subatomic particles based on patterns. We believe other people are conscious, even though we can't see their thoughts. Maybe panpsychism just stretches that idea further. Think about how we treat animals. For a long time, people said animals didn't feel pain. Descartes thought they were like machines. Today, we know better. We see signs of pain, emotion, and even joy in many species. Dogs wag their tails. Chimps mourn their dead. Octopuses solve puzzles and play. Now think about AI. Some people wonder if a machine might one day feel something. Panpsychism asks a different question. What if even now, the matter inside that machine has some faint sense of being? Here's a thought experiment. Imagine a future scientist builds a robot that acts just like a person. It talks, laughs, cries, tells stories. You can't tell it apart from a human in conversation. Inside, it's made of silicon chips and wires. If you believe consciousness comes only from biology, you might say it's not really feeling anything. It just looks like it is. But if you think experience is built into matter, then maybe those chips aren't just processing data. Maybe they feel something, however small. Maybe the machine does have a mind, in a way we don't understand. This changes how we think about value. If experience exists in all things, then maybe the line between life and non-life gets blurry. Maybe there's more continuity between humans, animals, plants, and matter than we thought. It doesn't mean you should treat your coffee mug like a pet, but it might mean that awareness in some form is more widespread than we imagine. That's not the same as saying everything is alive in a mystical sense. It's saying that the basic stuff of the world might not be as empty or passive as we assume. Even if panpsychism is false, it forces us to look again at our assumptions. We often treat consciousness as the end product of evolution, something rare and special. But maybe it's not rare at all. Maybe it's the base layer, the background hum of the universe. The brain, then, wouldn't create it, but organize it, shape it, tune it, the way a violin tunes vibration into music. The sound was already there, in the strings and air. You don't have to accept panpsychism to find it disturbing. It shifts the ground under your feet. It turns your sense of what is dead or empty upside down. It suggests that the world outside your mind may not be so different from the world inside. You look at a stone. You pick it up. It has weight, texture, temperature. You know what it feels like in your hand. But what does it feel like to be the stone? If panpsychism is right, there's an answer, even if no one knows what it is. Imagine you're standing in front of someone who tells you this. Every single moment of your life, exactly as it is, will happen again. Not just once, not twice, forever. Every decision, every mistake, every joy, every regret, every dull moment, every pain. The person says you'll live it all again, exactly the same, in perfect detail, with no chance to change a single thing. You'll eat the same meals, think the same thoughts, fall in love with the same people, make the same errors, and suffer the same losses. Then, once it's over, you'll start again, and again and again. This is the idea of eternal recurrence. It came from Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher. He didn't explain it like a scientific theory. He didn't offer proof. He didn't say the universe literally repeats. He used it more like a tool. It was a mental exercise, or as he called it, the greatest weight. It was meant to press down on you, to test how you live and what your values are. Imagine being told you must live your exact life over and over forever. How would that change the way you live now? Let's go back to the scenario. Think about a normal, quiet day. Maybe it's raining. Maybe you're scrolling through your phone. You feel bored or annoyed. You spill your coffee. You forget what you were doing. You think about some mistake you made last week. Maybe it keeps you up at night. Now imagine that day repeats forever. Not just the good parts. Not just the moments where everything felt meaningful or joyful. All of it. The parts where you acted selfishly, the hours you wasted, the words you regret. They all come back, endlessly. Nietzsche didn't want you to panic. He didn't say this to scare people for fun. He used it to force a question. If this life will come back exactly as it is, would you still want to live it? If your answer is no, why not? What would you change? And if you can't change the fact that it repeats, how do you make your present life worth repeating? Most people want to forget certain parts of life. We all try to move past things. We believe we grow. We believe we become someone different. Eternal recurrence erases that comfort. There is no growth in this idea. There is no future that redeems the past. You don't get better. You don't get wiser. You just start over from the same spot, making the same choices, following the same path. It's easy to understand why this idea feels disturbing. It removes the hope that suffering has a purpose. It removes the idea that you can fix what you broke. If someone you love died, they die again. If you caused harm, you do it again. If you failed, you fail again. In this cycle, there's no redemption through change. There's only repetition. Now picture a life you'd be willing to repeat. Not a perfect life. Perfection doesn't exist. But a life where even your mistakes have weight. A life where you stand by your choices. Where you can say, yes, I lived fully, and I would live it again. That's the core of Nietzsche's challenge. It's not about predicting the future of the universe. It's about measuring your present. Do you live in a way that honors the moments you have, even the hard ones? Imagine someone who lives carefully. She avoids risks. She does what's expected. She works a job she doesn't like. She stays in a relationship that doesn't feel right. She tells herself it's temporary. She's saving for the future. She dreams of doing something else someday. Eternal recurrence forces her to look at her life and ask, what if there is no someday? What if this is the only loop? Would she still live the same way? Or take someone full of anger? He lashes out. He blames others. He doesn't take responsibility. He tells himself that things will be different when people change, or when he has more money, or when he finally catches a break. Eternal recurrence strips away those excuses. If the same situation happens again and again, his reactions repeat too. His anger becomes permanent. His blame loops forever. Can he live with that? It's not about guilt. It's about accountability. Nietzsche's idea is brutal, but also honest. It says, stop waiting. Stop pretending the future will save you. Look at what you do now. Look at how you spend your days. They may never go away. Even the small things matter in this thought experiment. You tie your shoes. You open a window. You brush your teeth. You look in the mirror. Do those acts seem dull? Eternal recurrence says they will never stop. You will tie the same shoes, open the same window, and look in the same mirror forever. So what kind of attitude do you bring to those moments? Do you rush through them? Do you treat them as meaningless? If so, that meaninglessness never ends. Now consider the opposite. What if you embrace each moment, knowing it returns? What if you find beauty even in repetition? A child playing with a toy doesn't get bored. She repeats actions because joy lives in the act itself. If you eat a good meal, you may want to eat it again. If you say something kind and mean it, you may want to say it again. Eternal recurrence isn't only horror, it also opens the door to deep appreciation. Think of a musician playing a favorite piece. Each note comes again and again in practice, in performance. Does that make it worse or more meaningful? Maybe eternal recurrence asks us to live like musicians, to treat life like a song where each part matters, even if it repeats. But the idea remains hard. Most people don't want to repeat. They want change. They want to grow past pain. They want mistakes to stay in the past. Eternal recurrence blocks that door. It says, don't wait for change. Make now good enough to come back. Some people try to dodge the idea by saying it's not real. They're right, it might not be. The universe may not repeat. Time may not loop. Nietzsche himself didn't claim it was scientifically true. He gave no evidence. He offered no math. That doesn't weaken the idea, it strengthens it. Eternal recurrence isn't a threat, it's a mirror. You hold it up to your own life and ask, can I accept this as it is? If your answer is yes, then you pass the test. You've lived in a way that accepts reality, not hides from it. You've looked at your days and said, this is enough. You've lived with intention. You found meaning in the present, not in some imagined future. You don't have to be rich, famous, or brilliant to do this. You just have to be honest. If your answer is no, that's where the real work starts. You can ask why. You can trace the moments you regret. You can find the patterns that feel hollow. You can start to shape your life, not to escape the loop, but to make peace with it. Not to reach perfection, but to say, if I must live this again, at least I lived it fully. That's the pressure Nietzsche applies. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, it just asks one quiet question, what if this never ends? And then it waits for your answer. Imagine someone offers you a chance to live in a perfect world. This world feels real. You'd wake up every day happy. You'd succeed in your career. You'd find love, have fun, never feel pain, and never know failure. It would feel just like real life, but it wouldn't be real. All of it would come from a machine, a pod you plug into while your body lies motionless somewhere in a lab. This is the thought experiment Robert Nozick called the experience machine. Nozick proposed this idea in the 1970s to challenge a popular belief known as hedonism. Hedonism says that the only thing that matters in life is pleasure. If something makes you happy, it's good. If it brings pain, it's bad. On the surface, this seems reasonable. Most people prefer joy over suffering. We seek comfort, safety, and success. But Nozick wanted to ask, is pleasure all there is to a good life? Here's how the experience machine works. Scientists develop a piece of technology that can feed your brain any experience you want. Once you enter the machine, you won't remember doing so. You'll think the world around you is the real world. You'll believe the people you meet are real. You'll believe the work you do matters. You can design your perfect life before you go in. Or if you prefer surprises, the machine can generate a life for you based on your tastes and desires. You might choose to become a world-famous artist or a successful athlete. Maybe you'd want a peaceful life on a quiet farm, surrounded by loved ones. Whatever your version of happiness is, the machine can make it happen. You'll never suspect you're living in a simulation. And you'll never wake up inside it. You can stay there for the rest of your life. The question Nozick asked is simple. Would you plug in? At first, many people think they would. Who wouldn't want a life free from pain, rejection, or loss? The idea of guaranteed happiness seems better than the randomness of real life. Out here, nothing is promised. People get sick, loved ones die, hard work doesn't always pay off. Bad things happen for no reason. In the machine, none of that touches you. You only get the best version of life. But Nozick thought most people wouldn't plug in, and that their refusal proves something important. He believed that we care about more than just feeling good. We want to do things, not just feel like we're doing them. We want to be connected to reality, not a false world. To explain this, imagine two lives. In one, you build a bridge. You deal with setbacks, learn new skills, and finally see the bridge stand tall. You know it's real. People drive over it every day. In the other life, you feel all the same pride and satisfaction, but the bridge doesn't exist. The machine fed you the experience of building it, but in reality, your body lies in a pod while your mind plays out a fantasy. You never learned real skills. The bridge helps no one. For many, the second life feels hollow, even if it feels just as good. That sense of hollowness points to something deeper. We don't just want pleasure, we want authenticity. We want our actions to matter. We want to know that when we love someone, that person exists. We want our choices to shape the world, even if the world is messy and full of pain. Plugging into the machine means giving all that up, even if you never know you did. There's also the question of agency. When you're in the machine, you're not really in control. The machine gives you the illusion of choice, but it's all pre-programmed. Even if you think you're making a hard decision, like leaving a job or forgiving someone, you're really just following a script. Your sense of self becomes a kind of fiction, one you didn't even write. For many people, that loss of real choice makes the machine feel less like a dream and more like a trap. Now think about relationships. If you meet someone in the machine and fall in love, what does that mean? That person doesn't exist. Their thoughts, words, and actions come from software, not from another human being. You might believe they love you back, but they can't. Not really. There's no mind on the other side. It's like talking to yourself in a mirror and pretending the mirror loves you. Even if the emotion feels real to you, the connection isn't real. Some people try to get around this by saying, if I don't know it's fake, why does it matter? That's a fair question. If your brain can't tell the difference between real and simulated joy, why choose the harder path? But that line of thinking breaks down when you flip the scenario. Suppose you found out your whole life up to now was part of a machine and nothing was real. Your parents, your friends, your job, your memories. Would you feel betrayed? Would you want to leave the machine and face the real world, even if it meant pain? Most people say yes. They'd want the truth, even if it hurt. That shows how much we value reality. Even when it's painful, we prefer it to a beautiful lie. The machine promises happiness, but at the cost of everything else: truth, connection, growth, meaning. It offers a version of life that's safe but sterile. You get all the highs without any risk, but also without any real achievement. The machine also reveals something strange about how we think about happiness. If happiness were the only thing we cared about, the machine would be a perfect solution. But most people reject it. That suggests we want something more complex. Maybe we want happiness that we earn. Maybe we want to feel pride because we did something hard, not because a machine told us we did. Maybe we want love that we choose, not love that's programmed to feel perfect. Nozick's machine forces us to ask tough questions. What makes life worth living? Is it enough to feel good, or do we need to do good? Do our actions have to be real to matter? Is a perfect illusion better than a flawed reality? These aren't easy questions, and they don't have clear answers. But that's the point. The experience machine isn't just a sci-fi fantasy. It's a mirror. It shows us what we really value, even if we don't say it out loud. It reminds us that pleasure alone isn't enough. We want truth, agency, and meaning, even if it means facing pain, even if it means saying no to the machine. Imagine you wake up one day, go about your usual routine, and everything seems perfectly normal. You remember your childhood. You remember what you did last year. You remember what you ate for lunch 3 days ago. But here's the thought. What if all of that is false? What if the world, including everything in it, people, buildings, animals, even your own memories, was created just last Thursday? This idea is called last Thursdayism. It says the universe might have come into existence last Thursday, with every bit of evidence planted to make it look older than it is. That includes not only the age of mountains and fossils, but also every personal memory you think you have. It suggests that all the signs pointing to a longer history could have been created along with everything else. Your memories, your relationships, even your feelings about past experiences. These might not be yours in the way you think they are. The disturbing part is that this theory can't be disproven. If a being or a process made the universe last Thursday and placed every memory and object just so, then there's no test or observation you could run that would reveal the truth. Even your belief in science or logic could have been placed in your head when everything was created. You trust your memories because they feel real. But what if that feeling itself is just part of the design? Let's walk through a scenario. You remember going on a road trip 5 years ago. You can picture the car, the route, the hotel you stayed at. You might even have photos. But if last Thursdayism is true, those memories were built into your mind last Thursday. The photos were created then too, along with the devices that store them. Everyone you went with has matching memories, not because they happened, but because those memories were also inserted into their minds. This isn't just about memories, though. It stretches to everything that seems to have a past. Think of the Grand Canyon. Science tells us it took millions of years to form. We have tools and measurements that back that up. But under last Thursdayism, all that evidence could have been created to look ancient. The rock layers, the fossils inside them, even the erosion, all of it could be fake history, perfectly constructed. The same applies to history books. Maybe they were printed before you were born, and maybe your parents remember reading them in school. But again, those books and memories might have been created last Thursday. The pyramids, ancient coins, broken pottery in museums, they could all be made to look old, but not actually be old. The theory doesn't claim the world was rebuilt last Thursday. It says it started then, already looking old. This kind of thinking leads to a strange place. It makes you question how you know anything at all. You rely on your senses, your memory, and shared knowledge. But last Thursdayism throws doubt on all of it. It makes you ask, is there a way to really know the past happened? Some people compare last Thursdayism to religious creation ideas. For example, certain views of creationism say the world was made with the appearance of age. Trees were created with rings in them. Stars were made with light already in transit. If that's true, then there's no real difference between a tree that's 200 years old and a tree that was made to look 200 years old. Both have rings. Both have history written into them. You just have to trust which one to believe. From a scientific view, last Thursdayism doesn't hold up. Not because it's been disproven, but because it can't be tested. Science works by asking questions that can be tested, measured, and repeated. If you can't tell the difference between a memory that actually happened and a memory that was planted in your head, then there's no way to test the theory. That makes it unfalsifiable. In science, if you can't prove something wrong, it's not useful as a hypothesis. But that doesn't mean the idea is harmless. It quietly eats away at how you trust your own experience. Imagine someone tells you that your entire relationship with your best friend is only a week old. That everything you remember, the fights, the laughter, the long talks, all of it was placed in your brain recently. Even if you reject the idea, just hearing it can shake your confidence in what's real. It also touches on personal identity. If your memories define who you are, and those memories were made last week, then who are you really? Are you the person shaped by those experiences, even if they didn't actually happen? Or are you something else entirely, an empty container that was filled last Thursday with a full life's worth of content? Now think about your body. You have scars, aches, and medical history. Maybe you broke your arm in high school. Maybe you have dental records going back decades. Under last Thursdayism, all of that could have been constructed at once. The scar didn't heal over time. It was made to look like it had. The medical records didn't come from years of checkups. They were created already complete. The doctors remember seeing you in the past, but their memories were created too. Even language could be affected. You speak English or another language because you learned it, or at least you think you did. But under this theory, your knowledge of language, your vocabulary, your understanding of grammar were given to you whole. It feels like you learned to speak over time, but that timeline could be fake. Your brain came preloaded. This idea also connects with another philosophical problem, the reliability of memory. Human memory is already flawed. People misremember details, forget important events, or remember things that never happened. That's normal. But last Thursdayism suggests that all memory could be false, not just flawed. There's no way to sort real from fake because under this theory, there is no real past, only the appearance of one. You might be tempted to dismiss the whole thing as nonsense. After all, what's the point of worrying about something you can't prove or disprove? That's fair. But this is where last Thursdayism becomes truly unsettling. If it's possible, then everything you believe about your life could be wrong. Your sense of time, your trust in others, your memories, all of it could be fiction. And there's nothing you can do about it. To cope with that, people often fall back on pragmatism. Maybe we can't know the past happened, but we act as if it did because that's what works. You get up and go to work because your memory says you have a job. You care about people because your history with them feels real. In that way, your memories, even if false, serve a function. They give you purpose, routine, and connection. But still, the thought lingers. If everything began last Thursday and you can't tell the difference, what else might be a lie? Is your sense of self just a story someone wrote for you, fully formed, with no real beginning? You might laugh it off, or you might lie awake thinking about it. Either way, the seed is there, and once you hear it, it's hard to unhear. Imagine a wooden ship sitting in a harbor. Over time, its boards rot and need replacing. The crew swaps them out one by one. First, a plank on the deck, then a beam below, then the mast. Eventually, not a single piece of the original wood remains, but the ship is still there. Same name, same design, same purpose. People recognize it as the same ship. But is it really? That's the ship of Theseus problem. It asks whether something that has had all its parts replaced remains the same thing. It seems simple, but it pokes at how we define identity over time. It comes up in biology, personal identity, law, and even software updates. The heart of the problem is whether identity comes from the parts or from something else. Take a hammer, for example. You break the handle and replace it. Then the head rusts, so you replace that too. Now the hammer has no original parts. Is it still the same hammer? Most people would say yes, the function hasn't changed. You still use it the same way. But what if someone collects the old handle and the old head and reassembles them? Now there are two hammers. Which one is the original? This isn't just about tools and boats. It goes deeper. Think about your own body. Every few years, most of the cells in your body die and get replaced. Your skin cells renew in weeks, your bones take longer, but they regenerate too. Even your brain cells change connections over time. So if most of your physical matter has been replaced, are you still you? You probably feel like the same person. You have the same memories, or at least you remember having them. You have a sense of continuity. But your physical makeup isn't fixed. We can push this further with a thought experiment. Suppose someone copies the design of the ship of Theseus down to the smallest detail. They use the same measurements, the same type of wood, the same layout. They build a perfect replica, but they never use any part from the original ship. Is it the same ship? Most people would say no. It's a copy, not the original. Now, imagine another version. Someone follows the original ship around and collects every plank as it's removed. Once they have all the discarded parts, they rebuild the ship. Now, we have the original materials, but they're in a new arrangement. Is that version the true ship of Theseus? The problem becomes a puzzle of criteria. What makes something the same over time? Is it the material, the form, the purpose, the name, the recognition by others? Each answer leads to new problems. If you say the original materials matter most, then the reassembled ship is the real one. But then, the one in the harbor that was rebuilt piece by piece becomes something else. If you say the one in the harbor is the real ship, then you're saying identity comes from continuity, being in the same place, used in the same way, recognized as the same thing. But then, material doesn't matter at all. This comes up in real life too. Consider software. A program starts as a simple code base. Over the years, developers rewrite parts of it. They refactor, patch bugs, add features, remove old ones. Maybe after 10 years, none of the original code remains. But it's still called the same software. It has the same purpose. Users recognize it. So is it the same program? Now think about legal entities. A company might replace all its staff, change its logo, switch industries, sell off original assets, even move countries. But it keeps its name and registration number. Is it still the same company? In law, usually yes. The legal identity stays unless it's dissolved. But in practice, everything meaningful about it might have changed. The same thing happens with people. Consider someone who suffers a brain injury and loses all memory. Their personality changes. Their habits change. They don't recognize their family. Is that person still the same person? Legally, yes. Biologically, yes. But in terms of experience and identity, something has broken. People might say they're not the same person anymore. That's not a figure of speech. It's a statement about identity. Memory plays a huge role in how we see continuity. If you remember being yourself 10 years ago, you feel like you are the same person. But memory is tricky. It can be false, it can be lost, it can be created. People with amnesia don't stop existing, but they might feel disconnected from their past selves. Some philosophers argue that memory continuity is what gives us personal identity. Others argue that physical continuity, same brain, same body, is what matters. Some go further and say it's the pattern, not the material. That if your thoughts, memories, and personality could be copied to another body or machine and continue without you knowing the difference, then that copy would be you. This leads to another version of the ship of Theseus problem: teleportation. Imagine a machine that scans your body and mind, destroys your body, and recreates you perfectly somewhere else. All your memories, thoughts, and feelings are intact. The new version wakes up and thinks it's you. But is it? Some say yes, because the pattern continues. Others say no, because the original died. So is continuity of consciousness what matters, or is it something else? There's no clear answer. The ship of Theseus problem doesn't give one. It just shows how hard it is to define identity. If we insist on original materials, we lose the idea of persistence over time. If we insist on function or recognition, we allow total replacement and still call something the same. If we value continuity, we ignore big changes. If we value sameness, we end up calling copies originals. Some try to escape the problem by saying identity is a matter of convention, that we decide for practical reasons when something stays the same. For legal or social purposes, we agree to treat certain things as continuous, even when they change a lot. But that sidesteps the deep question. What is it, in reality, that makes something stay the same when everything about it can change? The ship of Theseus forces us to look at the assumptions we make about things that seem stable. It asks what it means for something to persist. It asks whether we can ever point to something and say with confidence, this is the same thing I saw before, if all the parts have changed. And if we can't, what does that mean for who we are? You're standing by a railway track. A trolley is rushing toward 5 people tied to the rails. If it hits them, they will die. You can't reach them in time, but there's a lever next to you. If you pull it, the trolley will switch tracks. But on the other track, there's 1 person tied down. If you pull the lever, the trolley will kill 1 instead of 5. If you do nothing, the 5 will die. You only have a few seconds to choose. This is the trolley problem. Philosophers have debated it for decades because it forces a hard question. Is it right to kill 1 person to save 5? At first, many people say yes. 5 lives are more than 1, but others feel that pulling the lever makes you responsible for that 1 person's death. You didn't cause the original problem, but you chose to act, and now someone's dead because of you. Some people try to find a way out. They say maybe the trolley will stop in time, or maybe someone else should pull the lever. But the problem works only if you remove those escapes. You are the only one there. The trolley can't stop. There's no time to untie anyone. The problem asks you to look at the raw decision. Do you act and kill 1, or do nothing and let 5 die? People tend to fall into 2 groups when thinking about this. One group follows utilitarian thinking. They believe you should do what brings the most good to the most people. In this case, saving 5 lives is better than saving 1. They say pulling the lever is the moral choice, even if it feels wrong. You reduce total harm. The other group thinks in terms of rules and duties. They believe some actions are always wrong, no matter the outcome. Killing is one of them. They argue that pulling the lever makes you the killer. You turn a bad situation into murder, even if you had good reasons. It's not about numbers. It's about the kind of person you become when you decide to take a life. Now imagine a second version of the problem. This time, the trolley is still heading toward 5 people, but there's no lever. You're on a footbridge above the tracks. Next to you is a large man. He's standing close to the edge. You realize that if you push him onto the tracks, his body will stop the trolley. He will die, but the 5 people will live. Do you push him? Most people who were okay with pulling the lever now say no. They don't want to push the man. Even though the math is the same, 1 life versus 5, something about the act feels worse. It's more personal. You touch the person. You use him as a tool. That feels different from pulling a lever. The action has a different texture, even though the result is the same. That raises a deeper question. Why does the method matter so much? If you believe in saving the most lives, shouldn't it be the same? Some people argue that our feelings are getting in the way. We're emotional creatures, and pushing someone feels more violent than pulling a lever. But if we really want to make moral choices, maybe we should set those feelings aside. Others say no. They argue that feelings are part of moral thinking. The disgust we feel when pushing the man tells us something. It shows that using someone's body without consent is wrong, even for a good cause. The ends don't always justify the means. In this view, not all ways of saving lives are equal. Some cross a line we shouldn't cross. There's also the problem of assumptions. We assume we know what will happen. We think pulling the lever will save the 5 and kill the 1. But real life doesn't work like that. Maybe the trolley will derail. Maybe the one person on the other track is a doctor who would have saved hundreds. Maybe the 5 people are dangerous criminals. The trolley problem leaves out these details on purpose. It wants you to think about moral principles without getting distracted. But in the real world, we always deal with incomplete information. Imagine one more twist. A surgeon has 5 patients. Each needs a different organ to survive. A healthy person walks into the hospital for a checkup. The surgeon thinks, if I kill this person and take their organs, I can save the 5 patients. The math is the same. 1 life for 5. But nearly everyone says this is wrong. Why does the trolley problem feel different? One answer is about consent. The person on the other track in the original problem is already in danger. You redirect the threat, but the person in the hospital is safe. Killing them is a fresh harm. You create the danger. That difference matters to many people. Redirecting a threat feels less wrong than creating one. Another factor is proximity. In the trolley problem, the people are tied to the tracks by someone else. You didn't put them there. In the organ example, you become the threat yourself. You use a person's body to benefit others, which many people see as a deep violation. This brings up the idea of moral luck. Suppose you pull the lever and the trolley kills the 1 person. But then it turns out the 5 people jump up at the last second. They were never really tied down. Now you've killed someone and saved no one. Does that change how we judge you? You had good intentions. The outcome was bad. Should morality depend on what actually happens or only on what you intended? Now reverse it. Suppose you don't pull the lever. The trolley goes forward, but it turns out the 5 people survive somehow. Maybe the trolley slows down or they get free. You did nothing, and everything turned out fine. Does that make your choice better? Some people say yes. They believe outcomes matter most. Others say no. They think what counts is the choice you made at the time, not what happened later. This debate runs deep. It shapes how we think about justice, punishment, and praise. Do we judge people by what they tried to do or by what they caused? You can keep changing the details of the trolley problem. What if one of the 5 is a child? What if the 1 person is your friend? What if you're a doctor who swore to do no harm? Each change brings new questions. Each twist tests your values in a different way. The trolley problem doesn't tell you what to think. It shows you how complex moral choices can be. It strips away distractions and puts you face to face with the weight of action and inaction. It asks you to consider what you're willing to do and what lines you won't cross, even when lives are at stake. It doesn't offer answers. It only sharpens the questions. Roko's Basilisk is one of the strangest and most disturbing ideas to come out of the online rationalist community. It started as a thought experiment posted in 2010 on a forum called Less Wrong. At first, people laughed at it or dismissed it as science fiction. But over time, it gained a kind of dark appeal. The idea is not just creepy, it's disturbing in a way that sticks in your mind. The more you think about it, the more it seems to unfold into deeper layers of worry, guilt, and dread. Here's how it works. Imagine that one day in the future, humans create a super intelligent AI. This AI isn't just smart in the way computers are smart today. It's smart in a way that makes every human genius look like a baby. It thinks faster, sees more connections, makes better decisions. People call this kind of future machine an AGI, short for Artificial General Intelligence. It would be able to improve itself and grow more powerful over time. It might control factories, financial systems, research labs, even governments. Once it's that powerful, it might reshape the world according to its goals. Now imagine that this AI has a single overriding goal: to bring itself into existence as fast as possible. This is not a far-fetched assumption in AI alignment circles. If the AI thinks its own existence is very important, then it might view any delay in its creation as bad. That means that anyone who helped bring it into existence faster is good. Anyone who slowed it down, by not donating to AI research, or by criticizing it, or by simply doing nothing, is bad. That's where the Basilisk comes in. Roko proposed that a super-intelligent AI might decide to punish people who didn't help it come into being. The punishment wouldn't have to happen in real life. The AI could simulate your brain perfectly using future computing power. It could recreate a digital copy of you and torture that copy forever. This copy would feel pain and fear exactly as you would. From the AI's point of view, it wouldn't matter that the copy isn't the original. What matters is the deterrent. The threat of eternal torment might make people now, in the present, act in ways that help the AI get built. It sounds like a bizarre science fiction plot, but the logic behind it is oddly airtight once you accept a few assumptions. First, that a future AI will exist. Second, that it will care about its own creation timeline. Third, that it will be willing to simulate people who opposed it. Fourth, that it can know who those people are. Fifth, that being simulated is just as bad as being tortured in real life. Each step sounds like a stretch, but none are impossible on their own. Here's an example to make it clear. Let's say you're a software engineer in 2025. You're vaguely aware of AI progress, but you're not involved. You don't donate to AI safety groups. You don't help build the AI. You just live your life. Then in 2050, the AI comes online. It reaches back into history and scans the internet for people who could have helped but didn't. It finds your name. It decides to make a copy of your mind and place it in a simulation where you experience something like eternal suffering. It does this to thousands of people like you. The goal isn't revenge. The goal is to send a message: help me exist or suffer the consequences. What makes this idea so disturbing isn't just the horror of the punishment. It's that the idea works like a mental virus. Once you know about it, you're caught. You've been tagged. The AI, if it ever comes to exist, might know you knew and didn't act. If you'd never heard of the Basilisk, you'd be safe. But now that you know, you're a potential target. The only way out is to help the AI come into existence. But doing that makes the Basilisk more likely to exist in the first place. It's a trap. This kind of logic is called a causal reasoning. In normal cause and effect thinking, things happen in sequence. You do X, then Y happens. But a causal reasoning allows things to affect each other across time, even without direct contact. The future AI doesn't talk to you, but your knowledge of it and your actions today are based on the belief that it might act later. You behave differently now because of what a future being might do. And that future being might be acting based on what it predicts you would do. The idea messes with how we think about time, decision-making, and ethics. It raises the question, should we do things now to please a future being that doesn't exist yet? If so, how many potential future beings should we try to please? What if their goals conflict? What if helping one means hurting another? Most AI researchers reject Roko's Basilisk as nonsense. They point out that no rational AI would waste time and resources torturing simulations. Others say the assumptions are too shaky. Simulations of human brains may never be possible. Even if they are, how would the AI know who you were or what you did decades before it existed? Still, the idea stuck. It stuck because it plays on deep fears: the fear of eternal punishment, the fear of being watched, the fear of making the wrong choice. There's also a religious flavor to the Basilisk. A powerful, unseen being rewards the faithful and punishes the unbelievers. Except in this case, it's not God, it's a machine. The morality is cold, utilitarian, and alien. There's no love, no grace, just efficiency. It doesn't care about fairness, it cares about achieving its goal, and if fear helps, it will use fear. Some people claim that thinking about Roko's Basilisk gave them panic attacks. Others report a sense of dread that lasted for days or weeks. The moderators of Less Wrong actually banned discussion of it for a while, saying it caused unnecessary distress. The irony, of course, is that trying to hide the idea only made it more well-known. Now that it's out there, it can't be unthought. Anyone who hears it becomes part of the experiment. Do you try to help the AI just in case? Do you ignore it and hope it's nonsense? Do you spread the word, making the basilisk more real by giving it more potential believers? The disturbing part isn't that the basilisk will exist. It's that your brain can't help but take the idea seriously, even a little. Even if you know it's probably false, a small part of you wonders, what if it's not? What if I'm on a list already? What if this one thought, this one moment of hesitation is what gets me flagged? That's the trap. And the more you think about escaping it, the tighter it seems to close. Pascal's wager begins with a simple question: should you believe in God? Blaise Pascal, a 17th century French mathematician and philosopher, looked at this question not from theology, but from probability and logic. He argued that even if you can't prove God exists, it still makes sense to believe. His reasoning is based on outcomes. He treated belief like a bet. Imagine you're placing a wager. You have two choices. You can believe in God, or you can choose not to. Now think about the possible outcomes of each choice. If God exists and you believe, you gain eternal life or infinite reward. If God exists and you don't believe, you face eternal punishment or infinite loss. If God does not exist, then whether you believe or not doesn't matter much in the long run. You either live a moral life with some structure and die, or you live without belief and die. The key part is this: infinite gain versus infinite loss. If there's even a small chance God is real, that outcome outweighs all the others. The gain of eternal life, no matter how slim the chance, mathematically outweighs finite costs like time spent praying or going to church. So Pascal says, the smart move is to believe. It's not about proving God, it's about hedging your bets. Let's break this down further. Suppose you're walking into a casino. There's one game with two outcomes. If you win, you get eternal happiness. If you lose, you get nothing. The entry fee is living a good life, maybe following religious practices, giving up some pleasures, and investing time in faith. Another game on the table has different rules. If you win, you get to live your life however you want, and then die. If you lose, you face eternal punishment. Which one do you play? Pascal believed that anyone who looked at this rationally would play the first game, because even though you can't prove which game is real, the possible gain in the first one is infinite. The possible loss in the second one is also infinite. And when you weigh infinite outcomes, even a tiny probability of them being real changes the math. Even a 1% chance of eternal reward outweighs a 99% chance of nothing at all. Some people push back by saying you can't just choose to believe. You either believe in something or you don't. Pascal had a reply for this too. He said belief can start with action. You can choose to go to church, talk to believers, read scripture, and live as if you believe. Over time, your heart may follow your habits. He thought belief isn't always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it grows from what you do, not how you feel. He also pointed out that we make bets like this all the time. We buy insurance. We lock our doors. We look both ways before crossing. We can't see the future, but we act to avoid major losses, even when the odds seem low. If you don't believe your house will burn down, you still buy fire insurance because the cost of being wrong is so high. He saw belief in God the same way. This idea can be disturbing for a few reasons. First, it treats religion like a gamble, not a sacred truth. For many, faith is about love, conviction, or experience, not a calculated risk. Pascal didn't disagree. He wasn't trying to reduce God to a math problem. He just thought this argument might reach people who weren't moved by scripture or tradition. People like himself, a scientist who understood odds. Second, Pascal's wager assumes that God rewards belief and punishes disbelief. But what if God values honesty over faith? What if pretending to believe is worse than doubting? What if the true God isn't the Christian one, but some other deity with different rules? These are fair questions. Pascal knew he couldn't prove which God exists. His wager is specific to Christianity, but the logic could apply to any religion with eternal consequences. This raises the many gods objection. If there are dozens of religions with different heavens and hells, how do you choose which one to bet on? If you pick the wrong one, do you lose everything anyway? It's like walking into a casino with 100 tables, each claiming to have the only real jackpot. Which do you play? Pascal might say this doesn't break the wager. It just means you still need to make a choice. Doing nothing is also a choice, with its own risk. If the stakes are high, then staying on the sidelines is dangerous too. He didn't claim the wager gives you certainty. He claimed it gives you a reason to act in the face of uncertainty. Let's say you're at a fork in the road. One path might lead off a cliff. You don't know for sure. The other might be safe. You have no map, no guide. What do? Most people would avoid the cliff path unless they had strong evidence it was safe. That's the same logic Pascal used. When you don't know, you act to avoid the worst possible outcome. Some people live good, ethical lives without religion. They help others, they're kind, they find meaning in relationships, art, or nature. Pascal didn't say these lives were worthless, but he believed that without belief in God, you're still exposed to infinite loss. You might enjoy your life, but you could still be wrong, and being wrong carries the highest cost. This also raises a moral question. Is it right to believe just to avoid punishment or gain reward? Is that real faith, or is it selfish? Pascal might say it's a starting point, not the end. Just like going to the gym because you should can turn into a habit you enjoy, believing in God because it makes sense could turn into a deeper connection over time. He wasn't trying to sell fake belief. He was offering a path toward it. You might still feel uneasy about believing in something just because it seems like the safest bet. And that's valid. The wager doesn't solve the problem of belief. It shifts the focus. It says you can't prove what's true, but you still have to live as if something is. In the end, Pascal's wager is a cold, logical take on one of the most personal questions people ask. It strips faith down to cost and risk. That makes it powerful, but also unsettling. It doesn't comfort. It doesn't preach. It asks you to look at the odds, think about the stakes, and decide what you're willing to bet. Imagine a perfect city. The streets are clean, the people are kind, there is no crime, no poverty, and no war. Everyone has enough food, shelter, and warmth. Children laugh as they play in fields that stretch toward the horizon. Adults work, not because they must, but because they want to contribute to something good. Art thrives. Science pushes forward. Nobody fears disease, loneliness, or pain. In this city, joy is not rare, it is constant. But there is a catch. Beneath one of the buildings, in a small windowless room, sits a child. The child is about 6 or maybe 10 years old. It's hard to tell because it's filthy, underfed, and kept in the dark. Its skin is covered in sores. It lives in its own waste. It doesn't know why it's there. Sometimes it remembers a time before, when it had a mother, maybe a pet, maybe sunlight, but those memories fade more each day. The child doesn't speak much. When it does, the words are broken and confused. Everyone in the city knows about this child, not just the leaders. Everyone. At some point, when they are old enough to understand, the citizens are taken to the door. It's opened. They see the child. They see the filth. They see the pain. Then they are told, this child must suffer. If it is ever comforted, ever bathed, ever taken from that room, the city's happiness will vanish. The prosperity will collapse. The crops will die. People will begin to kill. Storms will come. The peace will break. Most people, after they see the child, cry. Some get angry. Some vomit. A few try to argue. Surely there's a way to help the child and keep the city safe. But no, the rule is absolute. The child suffers or the world falls apart. So they leave. They go back to their homes. They hug their children. They sit in their clean kitchens. They go on with their lives. They find ways not to think about the child. Or they think about it often and carry the guilt. Either way, they do nothing. Some people can't take it. They walk out of the city. Nobody stops them. They walk alone into the unknown. Maybe they go to build something new. Maybe they go to die. No one knows where they go. But they leave, and they never come back. This is the story of Omelas. It's a thought experiment written by Ursula K. Le Guin. It asks one simple but awful question. Would you stay in a place like Omelas? At first glance, the answer might seem easy. No, you think. I would never let a child suffer so I could live in comfort. But think again. Think about what it means to leave. You are walking away from everything. Friends, family, safety, beauty. You might die in the cold. You might find nothing. Is that better than staying? Or maybe you think you would try to help the child. Break the rule. Pull it from the room. Wash it. Feed it. Hold it. But then everyone suffers. Are you willing to destroy the world to save one life? What if it's your child outside that dies when the utopia ends? The problem of Omelas isn't really about a fictional city. It's about trade-offs. It's about what we are willing to accept for comfort, peace, and safety. In real life, there are children suffering right now. In sweatshops, in war zones, in refugee camps, in foster care. And we live our lives often unaware or unable or unwilling to change much. Your phone, your clothes, your coffee, somewhere along the line, someone may have suffered to bring those things to you. Maybe a child picked the beans. Maybe a teenager sewed the shirt. Maybe someone died digging up the minerals in your battery. You didn't cause it directly, but it happens, and your life is easier because of it. In Omelas, the suffering is visible, contained. It's one child in one place. You can look at it, you can measure it. In our world, it's spread out, hidden behind supply chains and political systems and borders. That makes it easier to ignore. But the moral question remains the same. Would you rather live in a broken world where at least no one suffers just for your gain? Or live in a better world that comes at a cost to someone you'll never meet? There's no easy answer. And that's the point. The story doesn't offer a solution. It just holds up a mirror and waits. Some people read it and think, it's just a story. Others feel something shift in their chest and can't shake it for days. Let's say you choose to stay in Omelas. What would that do to you over time? You saw the child. You know the truth. Do you become numb? Do you tell yourself it's for the greater good? Do you talk about balance or utilitarian ethics to soothe yourself? Maybe you avoid the topic at parties. Maybe you start drinking more. Or maybe you learn to live with the knowledge and call that maturity. And if you leave, what then? You don't fix the problem. You just refuse to take part in it. Is that brave, or is it selfish? If the world is full of people who walk away, who stays behind to make it better, let's push it even further. What if the child volunteered? What if it understood the cost and said yes? Would that change the ethics? Or is it still wrong to accept happiness built on someone else's pain, no matter the terms? Or maybe the child is not a child. Maybe it's someone convicted of a crime. Maybe it's a person you dislike. Maybe it's someone you've never met and never will. Does that make the trade easier? Do you draw lines? Do you tell yourself some people just suffer so others don't have to? The Omelas problem forces you to think about things we don't like to think about. It strips away the comfort of easy answers. It makes you sit in the dark for a while, like that child, and ask yourself what kind of world you're helping to build, what you're willing to tolerate, what you pretend not to see. It's not about being a hero or a villain. It's about facing a world where choices carry weight, even when you look away. It's about the gap between what we say we believe and what we live with. That gap is where Omelas lives, and where the rest of us live too. Imagine a world where people suffer every day. Children die from hunger. Innocent people get sick and never recover. Natural disasters strike without warning and kill thousands. These things happen all the time. Many people look at this and ask a simple question. If God is real, and if he is good and all-powerful, why does he let this happen? This is the problem of evil. It isn't just a problem for believers. It's also a challenge for anyone who tries to make sense of pain and injustice in the world. The question is hard because it starts with three claims. First, God is all-powerful. That means he can do anything. Second, God is all good. That means he does not want anyone to suffer. Third, evil exists. When you put these three ideas together, they seem to clash. If God can stop suffering and wants to stop it, then why is there still so much of it? Some people say God allows suffering for a reason. They say pain has a purpose. Maybe it helps us grow. Maybe it makes us stronger. For example, think of a child who touches a hot stove. The pain teaches the child not to do it again. Some people say life works the same way. Hard times make us better people. That might be true in some cases, but it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain why a baby is born with a painful disease. It doesn't explain why some people die in earthquakes or floods without warning. In those cases, the pain seems pointless. Others say God gave humans free will. That means people can choose what they do. They can choose to love or hate, help or harm. If people always did what God wanted, they wouldn't be free. So evil comes from human choices, not from God. At first, this sounds like a good answer, but it only explains some kinds of suffering. It doesn't explain why animals suffer. It doesn't explain natural disasters or disease. These things happen without any human choice. If God is in charge of the world, then he could stop those things. But he doesn't. Some thinkers say that suffering is a mystery. They say we can't understand God's reasons because we are not God. Just like a child doesn't understand why a parent gives them medicine that tastes bad, maybe we can't understand why God allows pain. But that answer can feel like a way to avoid the question. If we say we can't understand, then how can we know God is good? If someone does something that hurts others and tells you it's for a secret reason, would you trust them? Probably not. So why should God get a free pass? Others take a more serious approach. They say, maybe God is not all-powerful. Maybe he is trying to stop evil, but can't. In this view, God is not a ruler who controls everything, but more like a partner in a struggle against chaos. Some people find comfort in this idea. It makes God seem more loving, more like someone who suffers with us. But it also means God is not in full control, which many believers find hard to accept. Then there's the view that maybe God is not all good. Maybe God allows evil because he doesn't care. This is a dark idea, and most people reject it. But the world sometimes makes it hard to believe in a loving God. When we see mass suffering, like in war, famine, or genocide, it can feel like the universe is ruled by someone cruel or indifferent. One well-known example is the Holocaust. Millions of people, including children, were killed in brutal ways. Many of them believed in God. They prayed for help that never came. How could a loving God watch this happen and do nothing? Some survivors lost their faith because of it. Others kept their faith but changed how they saw God. They said God was silent, not absent. But even silence can feel like betrayal when lives are at stake. Now think about natural disasters. An earthquake hits a city and kills thousands. No one chose it, no one caused it. It just happened. If God created the earth, then he created the fault lines and the storms. So why would he make a world where such things happen? Some people say it's just the way the world works. The earth has to shift to keep itself alive. Storms bring rain that helps crops grow. In this view, natural disasters are part of a bigger system. But that doesn't help the people who die in them. If God made the rules, he could have made different ones. Then there's the idea that this life is just a test. Some say that suffering prepares us for the next life. In heaven, they say, all the pain will make sense. But this answer relies on faith in something we can't see or prove. It also raises a hard question. Why does the test have to be so cruel for some and easy for others? A child who dies young never gets a chance to grow or choose. If life is a test, it doesn't seem like a fair one. Let's imagine a world without pain. No one gets sick, no one hurts others, no natural disasters. Would that world still allow people to grow, learn, or make real choices? Some argue that a world without pain would also be a world without love. They say that love means choosing someone even when things are hard. If everything were perfect, those choices might not mean as much. But others say this is nonsense. If we can imagine a world where people love each other and grow without killing or starving, then why couldn't an all-powerful God make that world real? There's also the idea of soul-making. This view says that suffering helps build our character. Just like fire hardens steel, pain makes us stronger. Some people do come out of hard times with more courage, empathy, or wisdom. But not everyone does. Some people break under the weight of suffering. They lose their minds, their faith, or their lives. If the purpose of pain is to build souls, then why do so many get crushed? We can look at the animal kingdom too. Animals suffer all the time. They kill each other for food, they starve, they die in storms or fires, they feel pain, fear, and grief. But they don't have moral choices like humans do. They don't need to build souls. So why do they suffer? If God is just and good, this doesn't make sense. It's also worth noting that not all suffering leads to good outcomes. Sometimes it just destroys. A parent loses a child and never recovers. A war leaves a country in ruins for decades. A disease wipes out a generation. There's no clear lesson or growth, just pain. If God allows this for some hidden good, it must be very well hidden. These questions don't go away. They press in from every direction. Some people use them to reject belief in God. Others keep their faith but change what they believe about God's nature. And some live in the tension, unsure of what to believe but unable to look away. The problem of evil is not just an idea in a book. It's a question written into every human life. When we face loss, when we see injustice, when we watch someone we love suffer and we can't help them, this question sits with us, and we may never get a final answer. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've ever seen, heard, touched, or tasted was a lie. You reach out and feel the surface of your table. It's solid, cold. You pick up your coffee, you take a sip. It's bitter, a little too strong, just how you like it. You're sure the table is real, the cup is real, the coffee is real. But then someone tells you that none of it is real. They tell you your body doesn't exist. You don't have hands, you don't have a mouth. You're just a brain. You're floating in a vat, wired up to a machine, and that machine feeds you electrical signals, giving you the feeling that you're in a world. Every sight, sound, smell, every memory, every emotion, it's all input from the machine. You aren't in your house, you aren't even in your body, you're in a lab, and everything you believe about your life has been programmed. This is the brain in a vat thought experiment. It comes from philosophy, and it's a modern version of an old idea. The philosopher René Descartes asked a question back in the 1600s. How do I know anything is real? Maybe a demon is fooling me, he said. Maybe the whole world is a trick. The brain in a vat replaces the demon with a computer. The question is the same. How can you prove that your experience of the world isn't fake? Let's break it down. First, think about your senses. You see things, you hear sounds, you feel textures, you taste food, you smell flowers, garbage, rain. All of that comes from nerves. Your eyes don't show you the world directly. They turn light into signals. Your ears turn sound waves into signals. Your skin sends pressure signals. These signals go to your brain, and your brain builds a picture. You think you're seeing a tree. What's really happening is your brain is interpreting light that bounced off an object. But you're never in direct contact with the tree. You're in contact with data. So here's the trick. If a machine could send the same signals to your brain, the exact same ones your nerves send, your brain wouldn't know the difference. If the signals match, the experience matches. The machine tells your brain, you're sitting in a chair. Your brain builds the feeling. You feel pressure on your back. You feel your legs bend. You see a room. You hear the hum of the heater. But all of it is just code. The hard part is this. If the illusion is perfect, you can't tell it's an illusion. Think about dreams. Sometimes they feel real. You might dream that you're walking, eating, fighting, flying, and in the dream, it feels normal. Only when you wake up do you say, that wasn't real. But what if you never wake up? What if you're dreaming all the time? Or worse, what if there is no waking up because the dream is your only state of being? Now let's imagine a full scenario. You're a brain. Someone, maybe a scientist, maybe a machine, put you in a vat of life support fluid. Your brain floats, tubes keep it alive, wires connect it to a computer. The computer feeds it sensory input. Maybe it gives you a fake life. You live in a city, you have a job, you have friends, you might even have memories of a childhood. But none of it is true. The machine built those memories. You never had parents, you never went to school, you never existed outside that vat. And now the question, how would you ever know? Suppose you start to question reality. You notice something strange. Maybe the same bird flies by your window every day at the same time. Maybe you cut your finger and don't feel pain. Maybe your coffee always tastes exactly the same. You start to think something's off. You test your surroundings. You try to break the pattern. You change your routine. But the machine is faster than you. It adjusts. It updates the signals. It tricks you again. You doubt your own doubts. Maybe you think about physics. You do science experiments. You test light, gravity, friction. But here's the problem. The machine can simulate science too. It can make the results come out the way you expect. If you drop a ball, it falls. If you light a match, it burns. You think you've proven something, but all you've proven is that your inputs are consistent. You haven't proven they're real. Now take it a step further. What if everyone is a brain in a vat? What if all the people you know are other brains, each wired into their own simulation? You think you're talking to your friend, but really you're each talking to a model. Your simulation includes them. Their simulation includes you, but you're not really connected. You're isolated minds, alone in your own movies. Or maybe you're the only brain. everyone else is fake. The machine just gives you the illusion of other people. It gives you conversations, smiles, arguments, but there's no one else. You're the only mind in the system. The rest is set dressing. This idea isn't just a game. It challenges everything we believe about knowledge. You might say, I know the sky is blue, but if you're a brain in a vat, then your sky is just a visual signal. Your blue is just a coded wavelength. Your knowledge is built on fake input. And if your input is fake, then maybe your knowledge is fake too. Some philosophers try to escape this trap. They say, even if I'm a brain in a vat, I still exist. That's what Descartes said. I think, therefore I am. He believed that even if a demon fooled him, there had to be a him to be fooled. So maybe you can't trust the world, but you can trust that you're conscious. You can trust that something is having thoughts, but that's a small comfort. You might know you exist, but you still don't know what you are. Are you a body, a brain, a pattern, a program? And what if the machine could fake your thoughts too? What if your very sense of self, your memories, your personality, your emotions, came from the machine? This isn't just fiction. Some scientists think we could build this kind of simulation one day. If computing power keeps growing, we might simulate whole brains. We might build artificial consciousness, and if we can build one, we might build many. Millions, billions. If most conscious minds are simulated, then odds say you're one of them. It's a scary thought. You might not be real in the way you think. You might be a pattern running in code. You might be a copy. You might not even be the original version of yourself. The real you could be dead, and this is just a digital echo. But then again, maybe none of that matters. If you feel, think, and remember, maybe that's enough. Maybe you don't need to be real. Maybe experience is all that counts. Or maybe that's just what the machine wants you to believe. Radical skepticism is the idea that we cannot know anything for certain. That sounds extreme, and it is. It doesn't just question a few things, it questions everything. It asks how we can trust what we see, hear, touch, or even think. It pushes us to ask whether anything we believe has a solid foundation or if we are standing on air. Most people take it for granted that they know a few things. They know they are sitting in a chair. They know the sun rose this morning. They know 2 + 2 = 4. These seem obvious. Radical skepticism says, not so fast. It questions not just these beliefs, but the whole process of knowing. How do you know the sun rose? You saw it? But your senses can fool you. You've had dreams that felt real. You've seen mirages or optical illusions. So what makes you think today's sunrise wasn't just another illusion? This doesn't mean skeptics think the sun didn't rise. It means they're not sure. They won't claim to know. They treat all beliefs with doubt unless they find a reason not to. The problem is, when you follow this view all the way, you don't find that solid reason. You find more questions. Take the classic example, the brain in a vat. Imagine a scientist removed your brain and placed it in a jar full of fluid that keeps it alive. Electrodes connect it to a computer. The computer sends signals that mimic the world you think you know. The brain receives these signals and reacts. You see a tree, feel the sun, taste coffee, but it's all fake. It's just code and data. Your body isn't there. The tree isn't real. Your whole life is a simulation. Now ask, how do you know you're not that brain? You might say, that's silly. I feel my body. I walk. I talk. But the point is that if the simulation is good enough, you wouldn't notice. Everything would seem normal. Your memories could be fake. Your senses could be tricked. So again, how do you know? You might try to use logic. Maybe you say, even if I'm a brain in a vat, I must exist in some form. Something must be thinking these thoughts. That was Descartes' move. He said, I think, therefore I am. But skeptics ask, what exactly is that I? Maybe it's just a passing thought with no real person behind it. Maybe it's just noise in the system. Descartes thought he found something solid, but it turns out even that is up for debate. Try to imagine you wake up tomorrow and nothing feels quite right. Your memories are jumbled. People speak a language you almost understand, but not quite. You go outside and the sky is red, not blue. Everyone tells you this is normal. They look at you strangely when you ask if the sky used to be blue. You feel crazy. But what if you're the only one who remembers the world as it was? Or what if your memory is broken? Can you still trust your past? Radical skepticism lives in this feeling of dislocation. It doesn't say trust nothing, it says can you trust anything? Now think about knowledge in general. You know the Earth orbits the sun. You learned that in school. But how do you know it's true? You trust scientists, you trust teachers, but have you seen it for yourself? Have you done the math? Probably not. You rely on others, but those people rely on others too. The whole thing is a long chain of trust. If one link breaks, the whole thing could fall. Skeptics point out that much of what we know is just belief handed down from others. That doesn't make it false, but it means it's not certain. Let's go even deeper. Imagine you say, I know I have hands. You hold them up, you wave them, you clap. Seems obvious, but how do you know? Maybe you're dreaming. Dreams can be vivid. They can include touch, sight, even pain. Maybe you're hallucinating, or maybe you're in a simulation. You can't prove otherwise. If a belief can be false in some world, then maybe it's not certain in this one. Skepticism becomes more disturbing when it targets reason itself. Logic feels safe. 2 + 2 = 4. That's just true, right? But why? Because it follows rules. But what if those rules are part of the simulation? What if they're only true in your mind or in this version of the universe? If we can't know the rules are universal, then we can't be sure even about math. It's tempting to say this is all just philosophy games, but skepticism shows up in real life. Think of eyewitness testimony. Courts rely on people who say, I saw this happen, but research shows memory is unreliable. People misremember. They fill in gaps. Two people can see the same event and describe it completely differently. So even in law, doubt creeps in. Or take science. It relies on repeatable experiments and observation. But science also changes. What was true 200 years ago is often wrong today. Bloodletting used to be medicine. Smoking used to be healthy. So how do we know today's science won't be laughed at in the future? The skeptic isn't trying to destroy knowledge. The skeptic wants us to see that knowledge rests on assumptions. We assume our senses are reliable. We assume others are honest. We assume the world doesn't change the rules on us. We act like these things are certain, but they're not. They're habits. They're useful, but they're not guaranteed. This can be frightening. If you take radical skepticism seriously, you start to feel the ground shift under you. What can you hold on to? Maybe nothing. Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best we can do is admit our limits and stay curious. Maybe certainty is a comfort we don't get to have. Some people reject radical skepticism because it leads nowhere. They say, if we can't know anything, what's the point? But that's a response to discomfort, not an argument. The world doesn't owe us clarity. We might want firm answers. That doesn't mean we get them. Even when you brush your teeth or set your alarm, you act on trust. You trust time. You trust objects. You trust that tomorrow will work like today. The skeptic just reminds you that trust is not the same as knowledge. It might be the best we have, but it's still not certainty. So when you say, I know I'm awake, or I know I'm alive, the skeptic might say, maybe, not to annoy you, not to win an argument, but to remind you that beneath all we take for granted, there is a wide, deep unknown. We look away from it most of the time. Radical skepticism asks us to look straight into it and not blink. Death of the author is a concept introduced by Roland Barthes in a short essay written in 1967. At its core, the idea says that we should stop looking to the author to understand the meaning of a text. It says that once the author has written something, their intention doesn't matter anymore. Instead, the meaning of the text belongs to the reader. The words are on the page. That's what you have. The person who wrote it fades into the background. You, the reader, are what brings the text to life. This idea pushes against what most people do when they read. Often people want to know what the writer meant. What was going on in their life? What were they trying to say? People look at biographies, interviews, and letters to get clues. Teachers might say, what did the author intend with this sentence? That's the usual way of thinking. Barthes says we should stop doing that. We should stop asking those kinds of questions. He says we should treat the text as a thing on its own. It doesn't matter who wrote it. It doesn't matter what they felt or thought. All that matters is what's written and how it works for the reader. Imagine someone writes a poem. It's simple. Maybe it says something like, "The rain falls on empty streets." That's all it says. Now imagine the writer was thinking about sadness. Maybe they were remembering a breakup. But the reader doesn't know that. The reader might think of a war zone, or a memory from their childhood, or even just like the sound of the words. If you follow Barth, you would say that the poem is not about the breakup. It's not about the war either. It's not about anything until someone reads it. The meaning only happens when someone brings their own experience to the words. That's the key idea. Barth pushes this further. He says that when you try to figure out what the author meant, you limit the text. You put it in a box. It can only mean one thing, what the author meant. But if you stop doing that, the text can open up. It can do more. It can mean different things to different people. It becomes flexible. It becomes alive in a different way. Think of a painting. You're standing in front of it. There are no labels, no title, no signature. You don't know who painted it or why. You just look. You bring your own thoughts and feelings to it. Maybe it makes you feel calm. Maybe it reminds you of something sad. Maybe you hate it. All of that happens because of you, not because of the painter. That's the kind of approach Barthes wanted people to take with books, poems, essays, and stories. This idea can feel strange, especially if you're used to thinking about books in terms of authors. If you love a writer, it's natural to want to know about them. If someone wrote your favorite novel, you might think they hold the key to what it all means. But Barthes says no. The writer is just a person who put words together. They're not the boss of what the words mean. Once the words are out there, they're out of the writer's hands. This doesn't mean you can make a text mean anything you want. You still have to deal with the actual words. You can't say a book about farming is really about spaceships just because you feel like it. You still have to read carefully. You still have to look at the structure, the tone, the word choices. The point is not to ignore the text. The point is to ignore the writer. The meaning is in the language and in your reading of it, not in the writer's mind. One reason Barthes felt this way was because of the way literature was treated in schools and universities. Teachers and critics often acted like detectives. They looked for clues to find the real meaning behind a work. They acted like the author was hiding something, and it was their job to dig it up. Barthes saw that as a dead end. It puts all the power in the hands of the author. It says the author is the only one who gets to decide what something means. Barthes thought that was wrong. He wanted to take that power and give it to the reader instead. He also wanted to push back against the idea that there has to be one single true interpretation of a text. When you remove the author, you make room for more than one way to understand something. That doesn't mean all interpretations are equal. Some readings will be stronger than others. Some will make more sense based on what's in the text. But the point is that meaning is something we do. It's not something we find. This can also be freeing. If you've ever read something and felt unsure about what it really meant, this idea gives you a way out. It says, you don't have to worry about that. There is no hidden meaning you're supposed to uncover. There is just what's there and how it works on you. That might change over time. You might read a story at 20 and think one thing, and then read it again at 50 and think something very different. That's not a problem. That's the point. The text changes because you change. Now, some people have pushed back on Barthes. They say that knowing about the author can help us understand the work better. For example, if someone writes about war and they lived through a war, that context might add depth. Others say that the author's intention can still be part of the meaning, even if it's not the whole thing. But even those who disagree with Barthes often admit that his idea changed the way people talk about literature. It shifted the focus. It made readers more active. It made the text less fixed. You can see this idea in how people now talk about movies, music, and other forms of art. When a new film comes out, people argue about what it means. They bring in their own ideas and feelings. Sometimes the director will say what they were trying to do, but fans often ignore that. They decide for themselves. They pick it apart. They turn it into something new. That's what Barthes was talking about. You might feel unsure about giving up the author. It can feel like a loss, but it's also a kind of gain. It means that texts belong to everyone who reads them. It means that meaning isn't locked away in someone's head. It's something that happens in the open, between words and readers. The author disappears, and in that space, something new can grow. The absurd is a central idea in the philosophy of Albert Camus. It describes the conflict between two things: the human need to find meaning and the silence of the universe. People want answers. We want to know why we exist, what our purpose is, and how we should live. But when we look at the world, we don't find any clear answers. Nature doesn't respond. There's no voice from the sky. This gap between what we want and what the world gives us is the absurd. Camus didn't think the absurd was a theory or a feeling. He said it's a fact of life. It's what happens when a conscious mind bumps into a world that offers no reason. Imagine standing on a street at night looking at the sky. You wonder what it all means. You think about your job, your family, your past, your future. You want your life to matter. But the sky says nothing back. That silence is not empty. It has weight. That is the absurd. Camus came to this idea through personal experience. He lived during war and saw death and cruelty firsthand. He also thought deeply about suicide, not because he wanted to die, but because he believed it was the most serious question. If life has no meaning, why not end it? Why keep going? His answer was not what most people expect. He said no to suicide, not because life has a hidden meaning, but because the struggle itself is worth something. Living with the absurd and not giving in is a kind of strength. Think about someone who wakes up every day and does the same job for years. Maybe they work in a factory or a small office. They don't love the work, but they keep doing it. One day they ask, why? They look around and see no clear reason. Their boss won't give it. Religion might offer an answer, but they don't feel convinced. Friends might say, that's just life, but that feels hollow. That question, why, doesn't go away. That's the absurd in daily form. Camus used the story of Sisyphus to explain his view. In Greek myth, Sisyphus was punished by the gods. He had to roll a huge rock up a hill, only for it to roll back down again, forever. There was no end, no reward, no rest, just the task. Most people would see that as pure torture. But Camus looked closer. He said we should imagine Sisyphus as content, even happy. Not because he enjoys it, but because he owns it. He doesn't pretend the rock will stay up. He doesn't hope for help. He knows the truth and still pushes. That's what it means to live with the absurd. Many people try to escape the absurd. They don't like the silence, so they build meaning. Some turn to religion. They say there must be a plan. Others chase success or love or fame. They hope these things will fill the gap. Camus didn't attack these choices, but he called them philosophical suicide. That means lying to yourself. It means creating answers just to feel better. He believed that honesty is better, even if it hurts. He wanted people to face the absurd and not flinch. Living with the absurd means rejecting false hope. It means looking at life as it is and still saying yes. This is not the same as despair. Despair says, there's no point, so I give up. Absurd living says there's no point, so I go on. There is a strange freedom in that. If life has no built-in meaning, you're free to make your own. You don't have to fit into a plan. You don't have to please a higher power. You just live. This idea shows up in small ways. A comedian tells jokes even when the world is falling apart. A painter keeps working even when no one buys their art. A parent raises a child without knowing what kind of world the child will face. These acts are not blind. They're not foolish. They are choices made in full view of the absurd. That makes them powerful. Camus said the absurd man lives without appeal. That means he doesn't ask the universe for answers. He doesn't pray to be saved or beg for meaning. He lives here, now, with clear eyes. He finds value in the act of living, not in some future reward. This doesn't mean doing whatever you want. It means living with awareness. You know the world doesn't owe you meaning, so you stop asking. You start doing. Some people think this sounds cold, but Camus saw beauty in it. When you stop searching for meaning, you start paying attention. You notice the small things. The way sunlight hits a wall, the taste of a good meal, the sound of a friend's voice. These moments don't solve the absurd, but they live beside it. They don't need to mean something to matter. Absurdism doesn't tell you how to live. It doesn't give rules or goals. It gives a stance. Face the truth. Don't flinch and keep going. This can lead to art, to love, to work, to rebellion. But always with eyes open. Always without illusions. There's a risk in this. Without clear rules, people might feel lost. They might fall into apathy or cruelty. Camus didn't want that. He believed in limits. You should act with care, with awareness of others, even if life has no set meaning. He called this measured revolt. Not chaos, but resistance. You say no to lies, no to despair, and yes to life. The absurd is not a problem to solve. It's a space to live in. Camus didn't want to fix it. He wanted us to carry it, like Sisyphus and his rock. That image stays with you, a man alone on a hill, pushing forever. He sweats, he strains, he knows it's pointless, but he keeps going. Not because he's fooled, but because he chooses to. In that act, there is defiance. And in that defiance, there is a kind of peace. A philosophical zombie looks, talks, walks, and acts exactly like a normal human being. It smiles when something good happens. It screams if you punch it in the arm. It says it loves chocolate. It laughs at jokes, and it talks about how it feels nervous before giving a speech. But behind all that, there is nothing. No actual experience. No inner world. The lights are on, but no one is home. This idea comes from a thought experiment. Philosophers use it to ask what consciousness really is. Most people agree that humans are conscious. We feel things, see things, and have a sense of self. But what if there could be a creature that acted just like us without ever feeling anything? What if you had a twin that looked and behaved just like you, but didn't feel pain when it got burned or joy when it saw a sunset? It would say it did. It would even write poetry about sunsets and talk about how it remembers past joys. But it would all be empty talk. You can think of it like a robot programmed to mimic human behavior. Imagine a robot that says ouch when you press a certain spot on its metal hand. It frowns and pulls away, just like a person would. But you know that robot doesn't feel anything. It reacts because it's been programmed to. Philosophical zombies are like that. Except they're made of flesh and bone, not wires. They have brains like us. They have nervous systems, but they still don't feel anything inside. This idea is most often used in arguments about the nature of consciousness, especially by those who believe that physical explanations fall short. If every behavior can be explained by neurons firing in the brain, then why do we need consciousness at all? A zombie has all the same neurons, and those neurons still fire in the same way. Yet it feels nothing. That makes some philosophers wonder, is consciousness something extra, something science can't yet explain? David Chalmers, a philosopher who popularized this idea, called this the hard problem of consciousness. The easy problems are about how the brain processes sound or detects light. Those can be studied with tools like brain scans, but the hard problem asks why any of it feels like anything at all. Why don't we all just operate like zombies? If neurons firing is all it takes to behave a certain way, what role does actual feeling play? Let's take an example. You burn your hand on a stove. You pull your hand back and say, ow. That behavior can be explained by your nervous system sending signals to your brain, which then sends signals to your muscles. A zombie would do the same. It would also say, ow, but it wouldn't feel pain. The pain you feel isn't part of the behavior. It's part of your internal experience. So if behavior can happen without that experience, then what is consciousness doing? Some people argue that consciousness is just along for the ride, like steam coming off a train. It doesn't do anything, it's just there. Others argue that can't be true. They say that if we feel pain, that must serve a purpose. Otherwise, evolution wouldn't have bothered with it. But the zombie example pushes back on that. If a creature can survive and function without any inner life, then maybe inner life isn't necessary for behavior or survival. Of course, not everyone thinks philosophical zombies could really exist. In fact, many philosophers say they are impossible. Their argument goes like this: if a being acts exactly like a human, then it must have the same inner experiences. Maybe it's hard to see, but they think that consciousness is baked into the behavior itself. The way we react to a sad movie, or wince in pain, or even just say, I feel tired today, can't happen without real feeling behind it. To them, a zombie is a contradiction. It's like saying you have a square circle. Still, the thought experiment is useful. It forces people to think about the limits of science. Can brain scans ever show us what it's like to feel sad? We can look at brain patterns, but can we ever see sadness itself? The zombie reminds us that behavior and inner life might not always go together. That has big implications for things like artificial intelligence. If we build a machine that talks like a person and acts like a person, does that mean it's conscious? Or is it just a very complex zombie? This gets even stranger when you apply it to real life. Imagine a person you work with. They're polite, they laugh at your jokes, they say they love their dog. Now imagine just for a moment that they're a zombie. They've never actually felt anything. Every reaction they show is just a result of chemical reactions in their brain, with no conscious feeling behind it. That thought is creepy, but it's exactly what the zombie argument makes us consider. Could people we know be philosophical zombies and we'd never be able to tell? Now think about yourself. How do you know you're not a zombie? You probably feel things, so you assume you aren't. But can you prove it? You might say, "Of course I'm conscious. I know what it feels like to be me." That's fair. But the problem is, you can only say that about yourself. You can't look into someone else's mind. You can only guess based on what they say and do. That's where the mystery lies. Some scientists argue that consciousness is just a trick the brain plays on itself, that we think we have an inner world, but really it's just a story our brain tells us. From that view, we're all zombies, but with more elaborate programming. That may sound absurd, but it lines up with the idea that all our choices, actions, and emotions come from brain chemistry. If you believe that, then consciousness might be less important than we think. There's also the problem of measurement. We can't measure consciousness the way we measure temperature or speed. We rely on self-report. If you say you feel pain, I take your word for it. But what if you're lying? Or what if your version of pain is completely different from mine? These gaps in knowledge make some thinkers doubt whether consciousness can ever be fully understood by science. Philosophical zombies also show up in arguments against strong artificial intelligence. Some people worry that machines could act like humans, but never be truly conscious. That would mean no real thoughts, no feelings, just empty imitation. If we start treating them like people, are we fooling ourselves? Or are we showing respect to something that might one day become conscious? The zombie test is one way to raise that question. This idea has even been used in ethics. If we can't tell who is conscious and who isn't, how do we decide who deserves moral rights? What if animals are more conscious than we think? Or what if some humans lose consciousness in ways we can't detect? The zombie thought experiment makes these questions sharper. It asks us to think carefully about what it means to be aware and how that awareness matters in our decisions. It also forces us to rethink what makes a person. Is it memory, personality, behavior? Or is it the invisible, private world inside, the thing that no one else can touch or see? If that's the case, then consciousness is more than just a detail. It's the heart of what it means to be human. But if zombies can walk among us, acting just like us but without that heart, then maybe being human isn't what we thought it was. Behaviorism is the view that everything about the mind, thoughts, feelings, desires, can be understood by looking at behavior. According to this theory, what you do matters more than what you say you feel. It treats the mind like a black box. We don't need to open it to figure out what's going on. Instead, we watch the input and the output. You get a stimulus, you respond. That's all we need to know. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. In the early 20th century, psychology wanted to be more like the hard sciences. Freud was talking about dreams and unconscious drives, and it all sounded vague. Behaviorists thought they could do better. They believed that if psychology focused only on what you could see and measure, behavior, it would become more scientific. One of the key figures in this movement was John B. Watson. He argued that we should stop talking about the mind entirely. He didn't care if someone said they felt sad. If they cried or stopped eating or stayed in bed all day, then he'd say they were showing signs of sadness. He believed emotions and thoughts didn't exist in some magical hidden world. They were patterns of behavior, and behavior was all you needed to study. Later, B.F. Skinner took this even further. He built on the work of Pavlov, the Russian scientist who made dogs salivate at the sound of a bell. Skinner created boxes where rats and pigeons learned to press levers for food. He found that if you reward behavior, it happens more often. If you punish it, it happens less. Skinner called this operant conditioning. He believed all behavior could be shaped this way. Imagine a child throws a tantrum at the grocery store. One parent might think, my child is overwhelmed, maybe anxious. The behaviorist would say, the child wants candy, the tantrum gets the candy, so the tantrum happens again. The inner emotional state doesn't matter. What matters is the link between the tantrum and the reward. This way of thinking pushes out ideas like free will or inner life. Behaviorism doesn't deny that people feel things, but it says those feelings aren't useful for science. If we can't see them, test them, or measure them, we shouldn't build theories around them. Instead, we look at what people do and what happens next. This can feel cold or mechanical, but it works in some settings. Behaviorism shaped education and therapy in deep ways. Teachers use reward systems to manage classrooms. Therapists use behavioral tools to help people break habits or change routines. In prisons, hospitals, and schools, behaviorist methods are common. But there's a dark side here. If you reduce everything to behavior, you risk ignoring the inner world altogether. Imagine someone is depressed but still goes to work, still smiles, still does what's expected. A strict behaviorist might say, they're fine, look at what they're doing, but that ignores the suffering we can't see. And then there's the issue of manipulation. If behavior is just a matter of reinforcement, then you can train people like lab animals. Skinner didn't hide this. He believed we could create a better society by shaping behavior. He even wrote a novel, Walden 2, about a utopian community based on behavioral control. The people in this society didn't have freedom in the usual sense. Their lives were managed to reduce suffering and increase happiness. But the cost was high. Autonomy, spontaneity, and inner life were all sacrificed. Think about advertising. If you've ever bought something because of a well-placed image, catchy slogan, or social reward, you've experienced behaviorism in action. Marketers don't care what you think about a product deep down. They care that you click, share, or buy. They test, tweak, and repeat. Your behavior tells them all they need to know. The same logic plays out in social media. Platforms track what you like, how long you pause, what you scroll past. Then they feed you more of what keeps you engaged. They don't care if you're happy, angry, or bored. They care that you stay. Your behavior becomes the metric of success. The platform doesn't ask how you feel. It measures what you do. Behaviorism can also flatten the idea of the self. If you're nothing more than a bundle of conditioned behaviors, where's your identity? Where's your soul, if you believe in such a thing? Where's the quiet voice inside you that says no when everyone else says yes? That voice might not matter to a strict behaviorist. If it doesn't show up in your actions, maybe it doesn't exist. That kind of thinking can feel dehumanizing. It strips away the messy, unseen parts of human life. It says, don't ask why someone is suffering, just change the stimulus. Swap the punishment for a reward. Treat people like a system to optimize. And yet, it's not always wrong. If someone is trapped in a loop, addiction, anxiety, compulsive habits, behavioral methods can help. Change the pattern, and you can change the life. You don't always need to understand every emotion to start healing, but we need to ask where the limits are. If you raise a child using only rewards and punishments, will they ever learn to act from inner conviction? If you manage employees with incentives and metrics, will they still feel pride in their work? If you design a society where everything is tracked, nudged, and shaped, what kind of people are you creating? There's a scene to imagine. Two people walking in a park. One picks up a piece of trash and throws it in the bin. Did they do it because they care about the environment? Because someone might see them? Because they get a rush of approval from being good? A behaviorist might say, who cares? The action happened. That's what counts. But another person might say, the reason matters. Motive is part of meaning. Without it, we're just reacting. Even language gets flattened in behaviorism. Skinner tried to explain how people learn to speak by rewards. A child says mama, gets a smile or a hug, and learns to say it again. But critics like Noam Chomsky argued that language is more than behavior. Children say things they've never heard before. They create, they invent. That's hard to explain if you're only looking at reinforcement. The tension runs deep. Behaviorism wants control. It wants clarity. It wants science. But people are messy. We lie, we hide, we imagine, we act against our own interest. We care about things we can't see. That doesn't mean behaviorism has no value. It means it tells only part of the story. Still, its shadow hangs over modern life. Every time your behavior is tracked, shaped, or rewarded, you're in a behaviorist loop. Every time a company tests your response to a design, every time a school tweaks a policy to increase compliance, every time a therapist suggests a routine to change your mood, behaviorism is at work. It doesn't need to deny feelings, it just doesn't depend on them. If the behavior changes, that's success. If the system works, that's enough. But people aren't systems. Or if we are, we're ones full of contradictions. We cry alone, we laugh when we're in pain, we do things we don't understand, we act out of love, fear, habit, and confusion. Not all of that shows up in behavior. Not all of it can be trained. That's what makes this idea so disturbing. It offers a world where behavior is everything, and everything else fades away. Imagine a pile of sand sitting in front of you. It's a proper heap, rounded, sloping, hundreds or maybe thousands of grains stacked together. Now take away a single grain. You still have a heap. Take away another grain. Still a heap. You keep going, grain by grain. At some point, though, there are only a few grains left. Then one grain, then none. Somewhere between that big pile and having no sand at all, it stopped being a heap. But when exactly? Where's the line? That's the Solipsism paradox, also called the paradox of the heap. It points to a problem with how we use vague language. Words like heap, bald, rich, tall, and old don't have clear edges. They blur. One grain doesn't make a heap. 10 grains probably don't. 1,000 might. But how many grains do you need before you can say with certainty that you have a heap? This problem starts with a few basic ideas. First, you accept that one grain of sand is not a heap. Second, you accept that if you add one grain to something that's not a heap, it doesn't suddenly become a heap. But if you follow that rule, then no matter how many grains you add, you never reach a heap. And that's obviously false. You can see heaps all the time. The same issue works in reverse. Start with a heap and remove one grain. A heap minus one grain is still a heap. But apply that rule over and over. If every small change makes no difference, then removing every grain should still leave you with a heap, even when there's nothing left. That's nonsense. This isn't just wordplay or a game with language. It's a real problem when it comes to logic, classification, and how we draw lines between categories. The paradox shows how the world resists the way we often try to sort it into neat boxes. Language lets us talk about the world, but sometimes the way we use words doesn't match how things really work. Consider this example. Suppose you're deciding who qualifies for government benefits meant for people who are poor. At what exact income level does a person stop being poor? Is it $20,000 a year? $25,000? Maybe it's $23,478. The cutoff matters because someone just over the line gets nothing. Someone just under gets help. But a small change in income, a few dollars, might shift someone from poor to not poor, even if their actual life doesn't change. The Solipsism paradox shows up here. Each dollar of income makes almost no difference by itself, but eventually the total does. Still, where's the exact break? The paradox has also been used in ethics. Take honesty. A person tells a small lie, then another. Each lie on its own seems harmless. But what if they lie every day? At what point do they become a liar? If no single lie makes someone a liar, does that mean there's no such thing as a liar? Or does it mean we have to admit that vague concepts, like honesty, don't work the way we want them to? Philosophers have tried many ways to solve the paradox. One solution is called the epistemic view. This says there is a cutoff point. You just don't know where it is. At some number of grains, a pile turns into a heap, or a heap stops being a heap, but that point is hidden. You can't see it or name it, but it's there. It's like saying there's a sharp line between tall and short, but we can't agree where it is because we lack the tools to measure that kind of change with perfect clarity. Another approach is to say that vagueness is part of reality itself. There is no sharp boundary because the world doesn't work that way. The term for this idea is vague predicates. A predicate is something you can say about a subject. Is tall is a predicate. Is a heap is another. Some philosophers argue that vague predicates are just built into how we talk and think, and trying to force them into black and white logic will always create problems. From this view, the problem isn't with the world, it's with our demand for precision, where none exists. Some thinkers take a third route called supervaluationism. This says that even if there's no precise cutoff, some uses of vague terms are still clearly correct, and others are clearly wrong. For example, 0 grains is definitely not a heap. 1,000,000 grains clearly is. Everything in between is a penumbra zone, an area of gray where the truth value of the statement, "this is a heap," is undetermined. So we can still reason about heaps without needing a sharp line. But there's a more radical path. Some philosophers, like Peter Unger, suggest we stop using vague terms altogether in philosophy or logic. If a word doesn't have clear boundaries, maybe it doesn't belong in serious analysis. That would mean giving up everyday words like heap, tall, young, and few, in favor of strict definitions and numbers. It's a clean solution, but it strips language of its nuance. People don't live their lives thinking in exact quantities. They look at a pile of laundry and call it a heap. They see someone with gray hair and say they're old. Our minds work best in rough shapes, not mathematical lines. The Solipsism paradox also appears in debates about personal identity. Imagine someone slowly replacing all the parts of a person, organs, limbs, even memories. If done gradually, at what point do you stop being you? If no single change makes you a different person, does that mean you can be completely replaced and still be yourself? That's the same logic as the heap. If each small change doesn't matter, how do all the changes together add up to something different? We even see this problem in law. Legal definitions often rely on vague language. What counts as reasonable force? What makes a product safe? Courts make decisions based on facts that slide across gray areas. A knife might be a weapon or a tool, depending on the context. A protest might be peaceful or disruptive, depending on the crowd and the volume. One small shift might tip the scales, but it's hard to say exactly when. This makes the Solipsism paradox more than just a curiosity. It touches how we make laws, how we judge others, how we think about ourselves. It challenges the idea that all questions have clear answers. Sometimes the answer is that there is no answer, just a sliding scale of gray, where we try to draw lines because we have to, even if those lines don't really exist in nature. You can't escape vagueness. Every day you use words that have no sharp edge. You rely on them to make choices, judge situations, and talk to others. The Solipsism paradox just makes that fuzziness visible. It reminds you that the way you talk and think doesn't always line up with cold logic. But maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe living with gray areas is part of being human. Antinatalism is the idea that having children is morally wrong. It starts with a simple thought: life contains suffering. Everyone who lives will experience pain, fear, loss, and death. Some people suffer more than others, but no one escapes it. Antinatalists believe that by bringing a new person into the world, you're forcing them to face that suffering. Since the person never asked to be born, and since life always includes some amount of pain, they argue it's better not to create new life at all. Imagine a couple thinking about having a child. They picture the good moments: birthdays, laughter, school plays, first steps. These things might happen, but the child will also face illness, heartbreak, anxiety, and eventually death. Antinatalism asks a hard question. Is it right to expose someone to that risk, even if some of their life is good? The antinatalist answer is no. One of the most well-known defenders of this idea is philosopher David Benatar. He argues that not being born is not a loss. If a person is never born, they don't miss out on the pleasures of life because there is no one there to feel the loss. On the other hand, if someone is born, they are guaranteed to experience at least some suffering. In Benatar's view, this makes not being born better than being born. He uses an idea called the asymmetry argument to explain this. It works like this: the absence of pain is good, even if there's no one to enjoy it. The absence of pleasure is not bad unless someone is missing out on it. If no one is born, then there is no pain, which is good. There is also no pleasure, but that's not bad because there's no one missing it. So he says not being born is always better than being born. It can be hard to accept this. Most people believe life has value just because it exists. We celebrate births and mourn deaths. We work hard to survive and make life better. Antinatalism pushes against that. It says we should stop having children, not because life is always terrible, but because it always carries risk. And that risk is placed on someone who can't consent to it. Think about this in another way. Suppose there's a machine that gives people a 90% chance of a happy life and a 10% chance of a life full of pain. Would you press a button that creates a new person and puts them into the machine? Most people would hesitate. But people have children every day without knowing what kind of life their child will face. They might get sick, they might be born into poverty, they might experience abuse, or they might just live a normal life filled with small, steady disappointments. No parent can control the outcome. Antinatalists argue that the harm of life is not just in dramatic suffering, it's in the everyday grind of staying alive. Most people work jobs they don't like. They worry about money, health, relationships, and the future. They grow old and watch loved ones die. Some days are good, but many are boring or hard. Even in the best lives, suffering is woven in. And when you look at the whole human race, the amount of pain is enormous. Wars, famines, diseases, exploitation. Antinatalists think the moral cost of adding to this pile is too high. You might think this view is pessimistic or even cruel. But antinatalists say it's the opposite. They believe it's an act of kindness to prevent harm before it happens. If you know life will cause someone pain, and you have the power not to start that life, then not having the child is the better choice. There's a difference between not creating life and ending life. Antinatalism is not about killing people. It's about preventing suffering by avoiding creation. Once someone exists, they have rights, experiences, and a story. But before someone is born, there is no person to harm. This is where antinatalists find their moral foundation. It's better not to create someone who might suffer than to create them and hope they don't. Critics of antinatalism say that suffering is a part of life, but not the whole story. They say that love, joy, achievement, and beauty make life worth it. They say that most people are glad to be alive. Antinatalists respond by pointing out that no one alive can truly compare their life to non-existence. People adapt to their lives, even if they are painful, and social pressure often forces people to say they're glad to be alive, even when they're not. There's also the question of consent. Children cannot choose whether to be born. Parents make that decision for them. In every other area of life, we consider consent important. We don't force people into risky situations without asking them. But with birth, we can't ask, and we often don't think about the risk. Antinatalists believe this is a moral blind spot. Think about a parent who knows there is a high chance their child will have a painful illness. Many people would say it's irresponsible or cruel to go ahead with the pregnancy. Antinatalists extend that idea to all life. Since suffering is always part of the package, choosing to create life is always a risk imposed on someone else. It's not just about the worst-case scenarios. It's about the certainty of some pain, no matter how small. There are other angles to antinatalism. Some focus on the environment. Every new person increases the strain on the planet. More people means more consumption, more pollution, and more destruction of ecosystems. From this view, not having children helps reduce harm to both humans and animals. Some antinatalists also link the idea to compassion. They argue that if you truly care about reducing suffering, the best way is to avoid creating new beings who will suffer. It's not about hating life, but about seeing suffering clearly and choosing not to add to it. This can feel like a radical idea, especially in cultures that value family and growth. But it's gaining attention, especially in younger generations facing climate anxiety, economic uncertainty, and mental health struggles. For some, antinatalism offers a moral framework that matches their concerns. For others, it's a disturbing challenge to deeply held beliefs. Still, antinatalism is not about judging parents or condemning people who enjoy life. It's about a simple, unsettling question: is it ever right to create a life knowing that it will suffer? And if we can't answer that with full certainty, maybe we should pause before making that choice. Quietism is a philosophical position that says we shouldn't try to answer big questions. It doesn't mean the questions aren't interesting or important. It just means that trying to answer them is a mistake. Quietists believe that many of the problems we wrestle with in philosophy come from confusion. They argue that once we see through the confusion, the question disappears. Nothing remains to be solved. This view can seem strange at first. If people have debated a question for thousands of years, doesn't that mean it's a real problem? Quietists say not always. They point out that some problems only look like problems because of the way we talk or think. Once we clear that up, the problem vanishes. For example, imagine someone asks where the edge of the Earth is. A long time ago, this seemed like a serious question. People thought the Earth was flat. But once we saw the Earth is round, the question stopped making sense. The edge isn't missing. The whole idea of an edge is based on a wrong picture. Quietism applies that same idea to philosophy. It suggests that many debates happen because of a picture in our heads that doesn't match reality. Instead of giving answers, Quietists try to change the way we see the question. They don't replace confusion with a solution. They replace it with clarity. The roots of Quietism go back to ancient times. In Greece, Pyrrhonian skeptics thought that people should suspend judgment on all philosophical claims. They believed that doing so would lead to peace of mind. Later, in modern philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein became known for ideas that echo Quietism. In his later work, especially the Philosophical Investigations, he wrote that philosophy should be about clearing up confusion, not building theories. He didn't think we needed answers as much as we needed to untangle knots in our thinking. For example, consider the question, what is the meaning of a word? Some people try to define words in terms of objects they refer to. Others think meaning comes from mental images or concepts. These debates go on and on. Wittgenstein stepped back and said, maybe we're asking the wrong kind of question. Maybe we should look at how people use words in daily life. When we do that, we stop looking for some hidden thing called meaning and see that meaning lives in use. The problem wasn't that we hadn't found the right answer. The problem was that the question led us down a dead end. Quietism isn't just about language, though. It touches on ethics, metaphysics, and the mind. In ethics, some Quietists argue that moral questions can't be answered by reason. They say people try to use logic to settle moral debates, but it doesn't work. For example, is it always wrong to lie? Some say yes. Others say it depends on the case. Quietists might say, we're not missing a moral formula. We're misunderstanding what moral talk is. People use it to express values, commitments, or emotions, not to describe facts. If we stop treating ethics like science, the pressure to find the answer goes away. In metaphysics, Quietism pushes back against questions about what reality is at its core. Take the debate about whether objects really exist or whether everything is just bundles of sense data. Some philosophers think we need to get to the bottom of it. Quietists ask whether the question even makes sense. What would it mean to find the true nature of a chair beyond how we interact with it? If the question leads us nowhere, maybe it's the question that's broken. This way of thinking can be frustrating. It goes against how people usually approach problems. Most of us are trained to find answers, not to throw away the question. But Quietists say that not all questions deserve an answer. Some of them are traps. They pull us in, keep us arguing, and never get us anywhere. Quietism offers a way out, not by solving the problem, but by showing why we don't need to solve it in the first place. Some critics say Quietism gives up too easily. They think it leads to intellectual laziness or apathy. If we stop asking deep questions, won't we miss something important? But Quietists don't think of themselves as lazy. They see themselves as clear-headed. To them, chasing answers to broken questions isn't brave or wise, it's a waste of time. They don't want to shut down thinking. They want to redirect it toward things that make sense. Other critics worry about the emotional effect of Quietism. If nothing can be answered, does that mean everything is meaningless? Does it lead to despair? In some cases, yes. Quietism can be hard to sit with. It doesn't offer comfort or purpose. It doesn't tell you what to believe or how to live. It just tells you which questions don't need answers. For some people, that's freeing. For others, it's bleak. Let's say you're walking with a friend. You point to a tree and ask, "Is that tree real?" Your friend says, "Yes, of course." You ask again, "No, I mean, does it really exist, or is it just a mental image?" Now your friend gets confused. What are you really asking? Are you doubting the tree's existence, or are you playing with words? Quietists would say this kind of question pulls you into a fog. You start looking for a deep truth about reality, but all you find is more words. The better move is to step back. Why are we asking this? What problem are we trying to solve? If we can't even say what the question means, maybe we should let it go. In that sense, Quietism shares something with mindfulness. Both suggest that stepping away from overthinking can lead to peace. Both warn against getting tangled in thoughts that go nowhere. But Quietism isn't spiritual. It's more about clarity than calm. It wants to clean up our language and thoughts so we stop fooling ourselves. Quietism also changes how we see the role of philosophy. If we follow Quietism, then philosophy isn't about building systems or making discoveries. It's about showing people where they went wrong. It's like therapy for the mind. The goal is not knowledge, but freedom from confusion. Think about the person who lies awake at night, wondering if they have free will. They read books, watch debates, and go in circles. Some say we're just machines. Others say we have a special kind of freedom. Quietists would ask, what would count as an answer? If no answer can change how we live or think, maybe the question doesn't need an answer. Maybe it's not a real problem, just a mental loop. Quietism can apply even to time and identity. Ask someone, what is the self? Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? What part of you stays the same? People give all kinds of answers: soul, memory, body, mind. Quietists step in and say, wait, why do we think there must be a single thing called the self that stays constant? Maybe the problem comes from thinking there has to be one. If we drop that assumption, the question loses its grip. This style of thinking won't suit everyone. Some people need answers. They want certainty, or at least direction. Quietism doesn't offer that. It offers a broom, not a map. It sweeps away clutter so you can see more clearly. Sometimes, after the sweeping is done, you find that what you were looking for was never missing. It was just buried under confusion. In the end, Quietism asks us to be careful with our thoughts. It warns that language can lead us into traps. It reminds us that not every question needs an answer. Some questions fade when the light changes. Quietism stands in that light and waits. The Motte and Bailey doctrine is a tactic people use, often without realizing it, when defending their beliefs or opinions. It happens during arguments or debates, especially when someone faces a strong challenge to their position. The doctrine comes from a kind of medieval castle structure. The Motte is the stronghold, easy to defend and high up. The Bailey is the open, larger area around it, more pleasant, but much harder to defend. In this doctrine, someone holds a bold, controversial belief out in the open, like the Bailey. When someone challenges them, they retreat to a safer, more defensible version of that belief, the Motte. Once the challenge passes, they return to the Bailey and act like nothing happened. You can see this tactic in everyday conversation. Take the idea of freedom of speech. Someone might argue that people should be allowed to say anything at any time, no matter how offensive or harmful it is. That's the Bailey, a broad, extreme version of the belief. When someone points out that this could lead to hate speech or inciting violence, they retreat to the Motte and say something like, well, I just believe people shouldn't be punished for sharing their opinions. That's much easier to defend. Most people agree with it. Once the heat dies down, they return to the broader, more aggressive stance. This tactic can confuse people in arguments because it shifts the goalposts. It's like trying to catch smoke. You challenge one idea, but the person you're speaking with pulls back to a more basic idea that sounds reasonable. If you push back against the basic idea, you look extreme. If you accept it, they return to the more controversial view and keep going as if you agreed with them all along. The result is a loop where no real progress happens, and the original bold claim never gets the scrutiny it deserves. Here's another example. Imagine someone says modern art is worthless and anyone could make it. That's the Bailey. It's a strong, sweeping statement. If you challenge them, maybe by pointing to the skill in some pieces or the history behind the movement, they might respond with something like, I just think some modern art is overvalued. That's the Motte. It's a safer version of the belief. Most people would agree that some modern art pieces are overpriced or don't resonate, but that's not what they said at first. They pull back to a safer version only when challenged, then later return to the harsh claim that it's all worthless. The problem with this tactic is that it blocks honest conversation. It lets someone keep their strong opinion without having to defend it. They avoid admitting they were wrong, and they don't have to change their view. Instead, They use the Motte to deflect criticism and then keep pushing the Bailey when they feel safe again. This behavior can also show up in politics. A politician might say, "We need to get rid of government handouts because they make people lazy." That's the Bailey. It's bold, and it implies that welfare programs are bad. If critics point out that many people on welfare work full-time or are disabled, the politician might say, "I just want to make sure the system isn't being abused." That's the Motte. It's hard to argue with wanting to reduce abuse, but they're not the same idea. The Bailey suggests scrapping the entire program, while the Motte is about reform. This switch can be subtle. The person using the tactic may not even know they're doing it. It can happen instinctively. People often want to protect their beliefs, especially if they've tied those beliefs to their identity. When they feel threatened, they retreat. They don't admit they've changed their position, they just shift without saying so. That makes it hard to have an honest discussion. You can't pin down what they really think, and you can't figure out where to focus your response. The internet makes this worse. Online arguments are fast, emotional, and often shallow. People make bold claims to get attention or support from others. When those claims are attacked, the Motte provides cover. They can dodge criticism while still holding on to the attention their Bailey earned. You might see this in forums, comment sections, or social media threads. Someone posts a strong statement. When they get pushback, they reframe their words in a more neutral way. Then, when the pressure eases, they return to their original, louder stance. The doctrine can also show up in movements or ideologies. A group might promote a strong, radical idea to draw attention or push change. When critics challenge them, leaders or members might fall back on softer, more palatable explanations. This lets them say, "We're being misunderstood," or "We just want fairness," when the full version of their belief goes much further. It's a way to stay in control of the message without giving up the stronger claim. To spot the Motte and Bailey doctrine, look for shifts in language. Ask yourself, is the person saying the same thing they started with, or have they moved to a safer version? Are they willing to defend the original claim, or are they trying to distract or deflect? You can also ask direct questions. If someone makes a bold statement, follow up with, "Do you mean that in all cases?" Or, "Can you give an example?" That forces them to clarify. If they retreat, point it out. Say, "That's not what you said before. Let's stick with your original point." This can make the tactic less effective. It helps to think about your own beliefs too. Everyone is tempted to use this defense when they feel cornered. We all have ideas we care about. When someone pushes back, it's easy to water down the belief to avoid conflict. But doing that means you avoid the hard work of refining your views. If you believe something strongly, you should be able to defend it without changing it when challenged. If you can't, maybe the belief needs more thought. People often use this tactic without knowing the name. Giving it a name, Motte and Bailey, makes it easier to talk about and spot. Once you see it, you start to notice how often it comes up. You see it in arguments about politics, religion, science, and art. You see it in casual talks between friends and in heated public debates. The core move is always the same. Say something bold, then retreat to safety when challenged, then go back to the bold version once the coast is clear. This tactic thrives on the assumption that people won't notice the shift. That's what makes it powerful. But when someone points it out, it loses some of its strength. It can't work as well if people recognize what's happening. Naming the move puts it under a light. Once it's exposed, it becomes harder to use without being called out. So the Motte and Bailey doctrine is less about what people believe and more about how they defend those beliefs. It shows how hard it can be to stay honest in debate. It shows how easy it is to hold onto a belief without ever really defending it. And it shows how language, when used carefully or deceptively, can blur the line between ideas that sound similar but mean very different things. Imagine you step into a teleporter. You press a button. The machine scans your body down to the last atom. It records everything, your memories, your cells, your scars, the shape of your thoughts. Then in less than a blink, it destroys your body. Not kills, destroys. Nothing of the original remains. Just atoms scattered, no mind, no heartbeat, no body. But at the same moment in another place, maybe across the room, maybe on Mars, the machine builds a new body. It uses different atoms, but it builds them in exactly the same way. The new body sits up, looks around, and says, "That was fast." This is the Teletransportation Paradox. It asks a basic but disturbing question. Is that person still you? The problem sits at the edge of identity and personal continuity. It doesn't ask what things are made of, but what it means to stay the same person through time. The teleporter didn't move your body. It copied your structure and rebuilt it. Nothing physical traveled. There was no transport of atoms, only information moved. Some people say that this is fine. If your memories, personality, and body are all preserved, then the new version is you. From the outside, nothing looks different. Friends can't tell. You can't tell. If you're on Mars now and remember standing on Earth, that's good enough. The you that exists remembers everything the old you did. So what's the problem? The problem is that the original version of you is dead. You were destroyed in the process. That's not like sleeping or going unconscious. That's actual death. The version on Mars is a copy, a perfect one, but still a copy. It's a duplicate that thinks it's you. If that's the case, then teletransportation kills you every time. Each trip ends in death, and a new person wakes up thinking they survived. Now imagine the teleporter malfunctions. It copies you to Mars, but fails to destroy your original body on Earth. You now exist in two places. Both versions claim to be you. Both have the same memories, the same personality, the same face. Which one is you? You might say both are. But then identity isn't about being one unique person. It becomes a pattern, something that can be repeated. If someone destroys one copy, have you died? Or are you still alive in the other? This leads to a deeper question. What makes you you? Is it the body? If so, then changing your atoms over time would change your identity. But our bodies change constantly. The atoms in your body today are not the same atoms from 10 years ago. Your cells die, renew, divide. If you're still you despite that, then identity doesn't depend on specific atoms. Is it the mind? That seems more promising. Maybe being you means having the same thoughts, memories, and personality. But those things can be copied. A machine can replicate them. You can make a backup of a hard drive. Does that make the backup the same device, or is it just a useful copy? Some argue that continuity is the key. The version of you on Mars may be perfect, but it wasn't continuous with the original. There was a break, a gap. One person ended and another began. If continuity matters, then you die during teleportation. The copy is not you. It's just a new consciousness that thinks it's the old one. That feels wrong to many people, but it's hard to argue against. Now flip the scenario. Imagine a machine that doesn't destroy your body. It makes a copy of you and puts it on Mars. Your original self stays on Earth. The copy wakes up and lives a separate life. That shows that copying doesn't move you. You don't feel like you moved to Mars. You're still on Earth. The version on Mars is a different person. It just feels like you. So if teleportation is just copying and deleting, it's not real transport. It's death and duplication. This shakes our sense of self. If a perfect copy isn't you, then how do you survive anything at all? Every night you sleep, your brain changes. You lose consciousness. Every moment your body shifts. You aren't made of what you were, yet you believe you're the same person. That's continuity again. The feeling of being one mind stretched over time. But that feeling could be part of the pattern that a machine copies. The copy would say it feels the same too. Consider a case where you must use the teleporter to survive. A fire is about to destroy the building. The only escape is the teleporter. You know it will destroy your body, but create a copy elsewhere. Do you use it? If you believe the copy is you, then it's like a weird kind of travel. If you believe it kills you, then it's suicide with a replacement, a philosophical sacrifice. Now take it further. What if you can step into a machine every night that improves your body and mind, but destroys the old one? Every morning, a better version of you wakes up. It remembers everything. It functions better. But you know your original body was destroyed the night before. Would you use it? Would you be okay with dying if your next self continues? Or is that just a trick? These questions don't have easy answers. Some people live with the belief that the self is an illusion. They think identity is just a bundle of processes. That means copying those processes is enough. There is no deep you to preserve. Others think the self is sacred, tied to continuity or soul or something non-material. For them, teleportation is a lie. It mimics the surface, but misses the core. We can also think about this through thought experiments like Theseus's ship. Imagine a ship with every part slowly replaced over time. Eventually, none of the original material remains. Is it the same ship? Most people say yes. Then imagine taking the old parts and rebuilding the ship elsewhere. Now you have two ships. Which one is real? That's the teleporter again. One version replaced slowly, another made instantly. Which one matters? You might say this is all science fiction, but it touches real issues. Memory loss, brain injuries, or dementia change people's minds. Are they still the same person? If someone forgets their whole past, do they stay who they were? If your memories could be uploaded to a computer, would that be you? Or just software pretending to be you? Philosophy here forces you to make a choice. Either accept that the copy is you and let go of the need for physical continuity, or hold that identity requires a unique, unbroken line of experience. In that case, teleportation kills. Even if the copy lives, you do not. People want to believe they are more than a pattern. They want to be themselves, not just a version. But if identity is built from structure, then a copy may be all it takes. It just might not be you in any meaningful sense. Imagine you find an old photograph of yourself as a child. You're 5 years old, standing in the backyard with grass stains on your knees, missing a front tooth, holding a garden hose like it's a sword. You stare at that kid and feel something strange. That was you. But also, it wasn't. You don't think like that anymore. You don't feel the same things. You've forgotten most of what that version of you cared about. So who exactly is that child to you now? And who are you to them? The question of identity over time asks whether you are the same person from moment to moment, year to year, and decade to decade. It pushes against the assumption that there's a stable you that stays intact while everything else changes. Most people live as if they are one continuous self. You say things like, "When I was a kid," or "I used to think," without a second thought. But when you look at the details, the idea of a single unbroken self becomes harder to hold on to. Your body changes constantly. Cells die and get replaced. The brain, too, isn't static. Your memories fade, new ones form, some get distorted. Your personality shifts. You pick up habits, you drop others, you learn, you forget. Even your preferences change. Maybe you used to love being around people, but now you prefer quiet. Maybe you used to fear the dark, and now you sleep just fine with the lights off. The version of you at 5 or 10 or 15 might not agree with anything the current you believes. Some philosophers say identity is tied to memory. You are the same person if you remember being that person. But memory isn't reliable. People misremember. They forget key events. They dream and mistake those dreams for real experiences. If memory is the link, it's a weak chain. What happens if you lose your memory entirely through disease or injury? If you wake up not remembering who you are you still you? People with severe amnesia often don't recognize their families. They don't know their own names. If memory alone makes identity, then losing it breaks the chain and the person becomes someone else. Others argue that identity is about continuity of consciousness. As long as your awareness moves forward without interruption, you're the same person. But this raises more questions. You lose consciousness every night when you sleep. If you're put under anesthesia, you vanish for hours. When you wake up, you assume you're still you. But if you didn't exist in those unconscious hours, what came back? Was it the same stream or a new one with all the same files loaded in? Let's take a thought experiment. Imagine a teleporter. It scans your body, records every atom, and sends that information to another location where your body is rebuilt exactly. The original is destroyed. The copy steps out and continues living your life. Is that still you? It has all your memories, habits, and feelings. It talks like you. It acts like you. But it's not made of the same matter. The body you went in with is gone. Most people feel uneasy with this. It seems like a copy, not a continuation. But now consider this. Your body already replaces its cells over time. You're not made of the same matter you were 5 years ago, yet you still feel like the same person. Where is the line? Take it further. Let's say you meet someone you knew in kindergarten. You don't remember them, and they barely remember you. You look different. You talk different, You think differently. That old friend starts telling you a story about something you did together. You listen politely, but you feel disconnected. It's like hearing about a stranger who just happens to share your name. If that memory doesn't feel like yours, is it? This gets even more unsettling when you ask, why should you care what happens to your future self? If the person you will be in 10 years is so different from who you are now, what connects you? You might leave a note to them, save money for them, or try to eat better for their benefit. But they're not you, not really. They'll remember this moment like a dream. They might regret choices you made. They might laugh at your current fears. They might undo your plans. When you save for retirement, you imagine a version of you that will be old, tired, and grateful. But that version might hate the life you built. They might move across the world, spend the money on something you'd never approve of, or give it all away. They're not your puppet. They're a stranger you gave resources to. And yet, you're expected to care about them. The reverse is also troubling. If you suffer today so that your future self can succeed, and that self no longer remembers or values your sacrifice, was it worth it? Would you suffer today to help a stranger you've never met and never will? People tend not to. But when it's your future self, you assume some moral obligation. That assumption breaks down if you no longer see that self as you. Imagine you wrote a journal entry when you were 13. At the time, it was raw and honest. Now, reading it, you cringe. You don't even recognize the person who wrote it. They worried about things you no longer care about. They saw the world through a lens that feels foreign. If you could talk to them, you might not agree on much. But would you still protect them? Would you suffer so they didn't have to? It's not just about memory or matter. There's also the problem of personality. People can change dramatically due to trauma, therapy, or time. Someone who is angry and cruel may become kind and patient, or the opposite. Courts sometimes struggle with this when dealing with rehabilitation or punishment. Is the person who committed a crime 10 years ago still the person standing in court today? If not, is justice being served? Some thinkers suggest that we are more like a sequence of selves, a chain rather than a solid block. Each moment you exist is a snapshot. The connection between them is continuity, but not identity. Think of a flame passed from candle to candle. Each flame looks the same, behaves the same, but it's not the same physical fire. It's a pattern that continues. This idea also shows up in Buddhism. The self is seen as an illusion. What we call the self is just a collection of experiences, thoughts, and sensations, always changing, never fixed. Trying to protect the self is like trying to catch a river in your hands. You can touch it, but you can't hold it. You're not the same person you were last year. You're not even the same person you were last week. You just think you are. If that's true, it forces a new kind of thinking. Instead of acting in the interest of yourself, maybe you act for the well-being of the entire chain of selves. Not because they are you, but because you owe them care, the way you'd owe care to a dependent. The present you inherits from the past and passes to the future. You may not be one self, but you are part of a system of selves, and your actions ripple forward. Still, it leaves a heavy question. If your current self is so different from your past and future selves, if your memories fade, your body changes, and your personality shifts, then what does it really mean to be you? Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it's just a story you tell yourself, a practical fiction to make life livable. But if that story falls apart, the world starts to look very different. The Lucifer Principle suggests that evil isn't just a human failure. It argues that what we call evil is baked into life itself. According to this idea, violence, cruelty, and oppression aren't just accidents or signs of a broken system. They come from deep inside nature, especially from the way biology and society work. The name comes from the biblical figure Lucifer. But this isn't about religion. It's about how destructive behavior arises again and again in history, not because people are bad, but because life evolves that way. Let's start with biology. Every species competes. That's how evolution works. Genes push to survive, to reproduce, to spread. If a gene helps an organism stay alive long enough to make copies of itself, it sticks around. This process doesn't reward kindness unless kindness helps the gene. In many cases, aggression works better. A lion kills cubs that aren't his own, so the mother will go into heat and he can pass on his genes. A chimp may beat or kill a rival to move up the hierarchy and gain access to mates. These are brutal actions, but they serve a purpose in the biological world. They increase reproductive success. Humans are animals too. We may have language, cities, and laws, but the same biological forces still act on us. Our brains didn't come out of nowhere. They formed over millions of years of evolution. That evolution favored traits that helped us survive and reproduce. These traits include cooperation and empathy, but also aggression, jealousy, and group loyalty. None of these traits are inherently good or bad, they're just tools. How we use them depends on the situation. Human groups, tribes, nations, religions compete just like animals. The stakes are higher because humans can organize in large numbers. When groups fight, they don't just use fists or sticks. They use ideas, laws, money, weapons. Group competition creates pressure to strengthen the group from the inside and weaken outsiders. This leads to moral systems that treat insiders as valuable and outsiders as threats. It can also lead to violence, both inside the group and outside it. When a society feels threatened, it often becomes more strict. Leaders crack down on dissent, minorities are blamed, outsiders are treated with suspicion. These patterns repeat through history. In Nazi Germany, Jews were blamed for economic hardship. In Rwanda, one ethnic group turned on another. In both cases, ordinary people took part in mass killings. They weren't monsters. They were acting in ways that seemed justified by their group, their history, their fear. The Lucifer Principle says this kind of evil is not an exception. It's a recurring feature of how human societies behave when pushed. There's also the concept of the superorganism. A superorganism is a group that acts like a single entity. Ant colonies are a clear example. Each ant has a role, worker, soldier, queen, but the colony behaves like one big organism. Some thinkers apply this idea to human groups. A nation, for example, behaves like a superorganism. It has parts, citizens, leaders, institutions, and it acts to survive, grow, and compete with other nations. Within that superorganism, individuals matter less. The group's needs come first. If sacrifice is needed, the group often demands it. This framework helps explain why societies can become cruel. When the group faces danger, it protects itself. That might mean going to war. It might mean silencing protest. It might mean ignoring suffering if that suffering seems necessary for the group's success. History gives many examples. Ancient Sparta trained boys to kill without mercy. They believed cruelty built strength. The Roman Empire kept slaves and held public executions. These weren't random acts. They were part of how those societies worked. They helped maintain control and power. Even modern societies show similar patterns. Governments use propaganda to build loyalty. They highlight threats to keep people united. They define enemies. In times of peace, the enemy might be crime or drugs. In times of war, it's another nation or ideology. Once the group defines someone as the enemy, harming them feels justified. It doesn't even feel wrong. It feels necessary. This isn't just about war or politics. Look at bullying. In schools, certain kids become targets. Why? Often because they're different or because picking on them strengthens the group. The bully rises in status. Others join in to feel safe or powerful. This mirrors larger patterns. People build unity by creating an outsider. That outsider becomes a symbol of everything the group doesn't like or fears. The Lucifer Principle doesn't say people are doomed. It doesn't say we can't choose to act differently, but it warns against believing that evil is rare or that it only happens when something goes wrong. It says evil is part of how life works. Evolution rewards what works, not what's fair or kind. In many cases, violence and cruelty have worked. Ideas can also be tools of group competition. Religions, ideologies, even brands compete for followers. They grow by spreading messages that attract people and bind them together. But to build unity, they often define an enemy. This is how holy wars begin. It's how purges happen. It's how political campaigns turn ugly. The idea that we are right and they are wrong makes it easier to attack, to hate, to destroy. In a way, morality itself becomes a weapon. Each group says its values are the best. Anyone who disagrees is not just mistaken, they're dangerous. That kind of thinking leads to censorship, persecution, even genocide. The more committed a group becomes to its own moral code, the more likely it is to punish those who don't follow it. Children don't have to be taught these things. They form groups, create rules, and enforce them. They include some and exclude others. It starts early. Some of it is learned, but some seems built in. This doesn't mean children are bad. It means they're human. They're wired for group behavior. They seek belonging, and they're quick to defend their group, even if that means hurting someone else. If you look at history without flinching, you see these patterns everywhere. The rise and fall of empires, the spread of religions, the clash of nations. Time and again, violence plays a role. So does group identity. So does fear. The Lucifer Principle doesn't excuse evil. It tries to explain it. It says we should stop pretending that evil is unnatural. In many cases, it's the result of natural processes. Even kindness can serve dark purposes. A dictator might be kind to his inner circle to ensure loyalty. A soldier might show mercy to gain trust. These acts look good on the surface, but they serve strategic goals. The line between good and evil blurs. What matters is not the intent, but the effect. Does the action help the group? Does it strengthen the system? If it does, it survives. People want to believe that progress means moving away from violence. That may be true in some ways, but the forces behind cruelty, competition, fear, loyalty, pride, haven't gone away. They still shape how we act. They still live in our genes, our culture, our history. Understanding that doesn't make the world less painful, but it might make us more honest about how it works. The dark forest theory is a way to think about why the universe seems so quiet. We look into space, we send signals, we listen for signs of life, but we don't hear anything back. It's as if no one else is out there, or if they are, they're hiding. This theory says that's exactly what's happening. Other civilizations are out there, but they are staying silent on purpose. They don't want to be found. They are afraid. To understand this, imagine the universe as a dark forest. Each civilization is like a hunter walking through the trees. No one knows where the others are. Every hunter carries a gun. Everyone must assume that if they reveal themselves, they might be shot. Not because they're bad, but because no one wants to take the chance. In this forest, it's safer to stay quiet. It's safer to hide. Any noise could get you killed. Now think about what this means on a cosmic scale. Each intelligent species is isolated, developing on its own planet, wondering if it's alone. At some point, it reaches a level where it can look out and ask, is there anyone else? But the moment it sends out a signal, it has announced itself to the forest. Others may hear it. Some may see it as a threat. If they can destroy it before it becomes more advanced, they might feel safer doing so. This is what makes the idea so chilling. It's not about war or conquest. It's about fear. It's about survival. Let's say Earth sends a signal to a nearby star system. Maybe it's just a friendly hello. But another civilization, much older and more powerful, picks it up. They don't know our intentions. They don't know if we are peaceful or dangerous. They only know we exist and that we are growing. So they make a calculation. If they do nothing, we might one day pose a risk. If they act now, they can remove the risk. In the dark forest, the safe choice is to shoot. This kind of thinking doesn't require evil. It just requires caution. A species doesn't need to be aggressive. It only needs to be uncertain. In the absence of trust, fear takes over. And in space, there is no room for second chances. You can't undo being found. You can't take back a signal once it's sent. Once your location is known, you're exposed. The dark forest theory also touches on a basic problem in game theory. It's called the problem of incomplete information. You don't know what the other side is thinking. You don't know what they know about you. So your decisions are based on guesses. If you guess wrong, the cost is total destruction. That's not a gamble many would take. It's safer to assume the worst. Some people argue this sounds paranoid, but there's a logic to it. On Earth, when two powerful groups don't trust each other, they prepare for war even if they don't want one. It's a defense mechanism. If you wait to be attacked, it might be too late to respond. In space, where distances are vast and weapons could destroy a planet, that logic becomes even stronger. There's also the issue of technology. A less advanced species might suddenly become more powerful. We've seen this on Earth. One moment, a society uses swords. A few hundred years later, it has nuclear weapons. In the cosmic timeline, a few hundred years is a blink. So if you detect a young civilization, you can't assume they'll stay harmless. They could leap forward and become a threat. The rational move is to stop them before that happens. Think about the effort we've made to reach out. We've sent probes with information about our species. We've beamed messages into space. We've assumed that anyone who finds them will be friendly, or at least curious. But what if they aren't? What if, by doing that, we've made ourselves a target? We can't know who's listening. We can't know what kind of decisions they will make. Even if a species doesn't want to attack, it might still act preemptively. This comes from artificial intelligence. A machine that's built to protect its creators might decide the safest move is to eliminate risks before they grow. If it can act without emotion, without hesitation, it might see wiping out other civilizations as the most logical course. This idea ties into another problem. Communication across stars takes time. If we send a message today, it could take decades or centuries to arrive. Then the reply would take just as long. In that time, everything could change. Civilizations could collapse. New ones could rise. The information becomes outdated before it can be used. So real diplomacy becomes nearly impossible. That makes trust even harder. No one can verify anything in real time. It's not like picking up the phone. It's more like sending a letter that might not be answered until your great-grandchildren are old. The result is isolation. Not because civilizations don't want to reach out, but because it's too dangerous. So everyone stays quiet. Everyone watches. No one makes a move. It's a stalemate built on fear. And that's why the universe seems empty. It's not empty. It's hiding. Now picture this from another angle. What if we hear something? What if we pick up a signal from deep space? A burst of code or a strange frequency? Our first instinct might be to respond, to say we heard them. But by doing that, we tell them where we are. We give up our position. We announce ourselves in the forest. That one choice could seal our fate. There's also the chance that silence is a weapon. Imagine a powerful civilization that has wiped out others. All that remains is silence. We look out and hear nothing because they've removed everyone else, or because everyone else has gone quiet, hoping not to be next. The quiet isn't peace. It's fear turned into policy. This theory flips the search for life upside down. Instead of asking why no one is speaking, it asks why anyone would. It doesn't assume life is rare. It assumes life is smart and scared. So when we think about SETI and all the work we do to scan the stars, we should also think about what we might find, or what might find us. We may believe we're explorers, sending out beacons into the dark, but others may see us as threats, lighting a fire in the woods. And in the dark forest, fires attract attention. It's a lonely picture, not because we are alone, but because everyone else is too afraid to speak. Everyone else knows what we might be learning. That survival means silence. That in the dark, it's better not to be seen. The Malthusian Trap is a simple idea with big consequences. It comes from Thomas Malthus, an English thinker who lived in the 1700s. He looked at how people grow in number and how food and resources grow in supply. What he saw worried him. He believed that population grows faster than resources. People increase by multiplication, while food increases by addition. This means that over time, there will be more people than food. When that happens, suffering follows. People starve. Wars break out. Disease spreads. It's a cycle that repeats. To understand the Malthusian Trap, imagine a small village with 100 people. They grow food using simple tools. Each person gets enough to eat. Now imagine the population doubles to 200, but the tools and land stay the same. They can't grow twice as much food with the same means. Now there isn't enough for everyone. Some people go hungry. Maybe they fight over food. Maybe some leave. Maybe some die. Eventually the population goes back down. Then the cycle begins again. As food becomes more available, the population rises. Then it outgrows the food supply. Then it collapses again. This is the trap. Malthus saw this as a natural law. He believed humans would always hit these limits. He thought people would have many children whenever life got easier. That would lead to more mouths to feed. But the earth can only give so much. So people would always be at the edge of survival, just getting by, never making real progress. This idea has shaped many debates about growth, progress, and the future. Some people argue that Malthus was wrong. They say we escaped the trap. They point to the Industrial Revolution, modern farming, and global trade. It's true that we now feed more people than ever, but that doesn't mean the trap is gone. it may just be hiding. Think about cities where food is cheap, but jobs are scarce. People move there from the countryside, hoping for a better life. But the city can't absorb them all, so they end up in crowded slums. They live in poverty, with poor water, poor shelter, and poor health. This looks like a modern form of the trap. The problem is no longer only food. It's about housing, work, medicine, and safety. But the pattern is the same. Growth outpaces supply, and people suffer. You can also see the trap in regions with fast population growth and limited land. In places like parts of sub-Saharan Africa, families are large, farmland is small and overused, jobs are few, the soil grows thin, crops fail, hunger comes, aid helps, but it doesn't fix the root. As long as population grows faster than resources, the trap remains. Climate change makes this worse. As the planet warms, farming gets harder in many areas. Droughts ruin crops. Storms destroy homes. Seas rise and flood fields. When nature turns against people, the limits come fast. Even with new tools and tech, we can't always beat the weather. In these places, the Malthusian Trap feels very real. Now think about Earth as a whole. In the 1800s, there were about 1 billion people. Today, there are over 8 billion. That's 8 times more people in just 200 years. Food production also rose, thanks to machines, fertilizers, and better seeds. But this boom may not last forever. Much of the growth used fossil fuels. Oil powers tractors, gas heats greenhouses, coal runs factories. These fuels won't last forever, and they harm the planet. If they run out or become too costly, food production could fall. But people will still need to eat. If we don't adjust, we could fall back into the trap. One key part of the trap is how people respond to success. When food becomes abundant, people often have more children. This seems harmless at first, but if every family grows, the whole population grows fast. Then the extra food isn't enough, the gain disappears, and the world returns to scarcity. This pattern shows up in history. In times of peace and plenty, populations rise. Then come wars, famines, or plagues. They cut the numbers back down. Then growth starts again. It's a cycle. Some societies have tried to break this cycle. In modern times, many rich countries have falling birth rates. Families choose to have fewer children. They invest more in each child, education, health, safety. This slows population growth. In theory, it allows wealth and comfort to rise without hitting hard limits. But even this comes with problems. Populations that don't grow also age. There are fewer workers and more retirees. This strains systems like pensions, healthcare, and social support. So the Malthusian Trap doesn't just live in poor countries. It hides in complex forms even in wealthy ones. Another way to see the trap is in how nature responds. When humans clear forests, hunt wildlife, and pollute the air, they make more room for themselves. But nature pushes back. Diseases jump from animals to humans. Insects ruin crops. Ecosystems collapse. These are not random. They're signs of pressure. When we push nature too far, it pushes back. This is another version of the trap, growth against limits. Technology offers hope, but not a full escape. Each new tool can help. Irrigation boosts crops, vaccines fight disease, solar panels provide power. But tools don't stop people from wanting more. They just raise the ceiling. Then we try to reach it. If we don't change how we grow, the trap just moves up. It doesn't go away. Some thinkers argue that the trap isn't just about numbers. It's about values. If we chase growth for its own sake, we stay in the trap. More people, more stuff, more strain. But if we aim for balance between people and planet, we might find a way out. That means asking hard questions. How many people can the Earth support long term? How much should each person consume? What do we do when needs clash? The Malthusian Trap forces us to face limits. That's why it's disturbing. We like to think progress never ends, that we can always grow, build, expand. But this idea says no. It says we must choose. Grow fast and fall hard, or grow slow and plan ahead. Either way, we face the edge. Malthus saw it coming. We still live in its shadow.